you ever speak to me like that again, better be wearing a cup.
Baby steps.
One break, I'm in
Okay, friends, let's everybody take your positions, please. Here we go. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, rolling. Dave!
And
Dave!
Unchained.
Welcome to Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
And we are at episode 97. Getting closer and closer to 100. We are in January of 2024, our first podcast of the year. And how are you feeling?
Cold. Very cold.
Very cold.
It's been cold lately, been snowy lately.
Cold and old.
Cold and old, and death from attending the EVH Con recently.
Yes, and we will get into all of that because Dave attended the EVH Con, and we will get all into that when we go right into Van Halen news.
Van Halen
News! Well, before we get into EVH Con, I gotta say this right off the top because I think it makes sense to have this at first because it leads into other things. So, my partner Dave here noticed something very interesting. He texts me and says, "Have you noticed that David Lee Roth's cover version of Jump has been removed?" So I go to YouTube. I go to Spotify. I go to iTunes. It's gone. So I was like, motherfucker. So I thought that was really, really wild. So then I start thinking, well, the other ones weren't touched. You know, he's got rights to do that. Wonder what the fuck is going on. But then something said to me, Jump is the moneymaker. Jump is the one that they want for commercials. No one's begging for everybody wants some for commercials. But what someone could do is someone could get Dave's version of Jump, which has Dave's vocal on it. And it's not Ed, but for a commercial in the background, it's pretty close to the original. A little cheaper than paying Van Halen for the number one hit from 1984. And I think someone put pressure on Dave to pull it down. Wanted to ask what your thoughts on were with that, Dave.
Great theory. I would not bet against you.
Yeah.
Because that is curious.
Yes.
And by the way, as usual, I cannot take credit for this because somebody else noticed it. They were actually asking, hey, what happened to that? Because I had it in a playlist and it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And that's when we started looking and we were like,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it does seem curious that out of all his songs that were put up and then this one's taken down, why would this one matter? Have no confirmation if that's the case or not, but it is curious that it's not around anymore after only about a month.
And the reason I bring this up is because the next Van Halen news item, which is the big meat of the Van Halen news right now, was Dave's 2 tirades on his podcast, The Roth Show. So he came out with 2 podcasts, one called The Ballad of Popsicle Sam, and the other one called The Sportsman's Lodge. And he's throwing darts at everybody. So what does this tell me? Dave's pissed. And I think he's being a little passive-aggressive maybe and trying to be funny and entertaining by doing it, but he's throwing barbs. And I think he's angry. So, what do you think of that theory, Dave? We're going to get into everything that Dave said in these podcasts, but what do you think of that theory, that Dave is angry and now he's throwing shit at everybody?
I actually thought he was trying to stir up some SHIT,
right?
But not because he was necessarily angry, but because he knows the Sam concert is coming up, and the only person who loves the Sam versus Dave story more than me is David Lee Roth, because as you remember, that's how he tried to position the whole dual concert that they did back in, like 20 years ago now. So I thought he was just trying to get his name out there and start some trouble that way. I didn't think he was angry at anybody, but now that you say that, that could be it.
Let me tell you why. In recent times, 3 things have happened to Dave. Number 1, Sam invited him to come sing and then took the invitation back. Okay?
Well, like I said last time, he didn't really backtrack. He really just clarified what he meant. And if you know Sam, he meant that the whole time. He was never going to invite Dave out on the whole tour. And I don't even know if Dave took it that way. That was what a bunch of people interpreted. And I think we both know that that was never going to be the case.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the way he reacted. Instead of saying, oh, no, what I meant was, when we come to California and we're in his backyard, I'd love to have him come. He said, no way, I'm not going on tour with that motherfucker ever again. I learned my lesson. Like, he didn't respond like...
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
come on.
right. Like, and he said something like, if you can remember the words.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So,
okay, all right, no, that's fair.
So,
but normally that stuff does not bother Dave. He's so above that.
Yes, he is. But wait a second. Let's remember. That's strike number one. Strike number two is Wolf pissed him off. Wolf went to the press and said, oh, you don't have a different kind of truth? Blame Dave. And he actually came out and blamed Dave for that album not being on streaming. Now, maybe Wolf is 100% right. I have no idea. Only the lawyers know. But he came out and threw Dave under the bus when it came to why isn't a different kind of truth available on streaming services. He said, ask Dave. He doesn't like the album. He won't sign up. So now he's pissed at Wolf. Okay? Now, he's also pissed at Al, most likely because of the Jump situation. Because Jump was then pulled from him. If he's got 3 guns pointing at him, now he starts getting on the Roth show. He hasn't done the Roth show in like a year. And now he's getting on the horn, and he was throwing barbs. Now, how did he throw barbs at Wolf? Well, he embarrassed his dad and his mom and said some really dirty fucking shit in a whimsical kind of way, but at the same time mean. So let's get into some of this. But do you see where I'm coming from?
I see where you're coming from. And more importantly, I see where you're going.
Yeah.
There may be some truth to that, because it does seem very strange that after a year he's picking up Roth show again, right? It's surprising and it's not, because Dave is like, let's do this today. Let's do that tomorrow. Let's do something, right? It just seems like everything is always haphazard. But there's probably some credence to what you say. But let's go into what he said that could support this, because it was like, oh boy. And before you begin, let me tell you, this was definitely a topic of conversation at EVH Con.
Of course it was. Now, just to start off, I'm going to just go on just the highlights, because Dave talked about a lot of stuff. But in the first episode, The Ballad of Popsicle Sam, he talked about Al and how Al drove Eddie crazy. He claims that Ed used to say this. Now, you got to remember, somebody's dead, and you start saying things they used to say in private. This is a very, very dark road. This person is not alive. And this goes for anybody, not just Eddie Van Halen. I mean, you can't speak behind the scenes about someone who died. That is not right. They are not here to defend themselves. You're putting that out there. There's no one else to back that up. So he says, Dave, I fucking hate my brother. That's why I drink. Dave, I fucking hate my brother. Give me another beer. He said Eddie tended to blame everybody else for his personal problems, and Roth insisted Eddie's tension with Alex was real. Al drove his brother fucking crazy. He's like a big bully, Dave said. And he also added that alcohol was often played a role in the brothers' disputes. Al weighed about 20 more pounds, drank between 2 and 6 6-packs of Schlitz malt liquor a day. At the height of his drinking, they had to put in a special industrial refrigerator in the guest house at Eddie's studio. He also said that Van Halen had an arrangement with the local liquor store. He said, I need 2 cases every other day, and it had to be delivered to the guest house. And they said that Roth's tour manager kept telling the liquor store owner. So he's throwing Al under the bus there. And Ed, obviously, by doing that, saying that behind the scenes. Now, listen, you're in a band. You don't tell tales out of school. There's a lot of shit that goes down over the years, over the decades in a band, and you don't let that kind of dirty laundry out. Now, you also don't fuck with a family, somebody's brother, somebody's wife. I mean, really, and it gets even worse. But this is what he said about Al. Now, we all know Al had a drinking problem. That's not a surprise. And you know what? In Al's defense, he cleaned himself up, and he's been sober since. So, good for Al. Congratulations to him. But, you know, when alcohol comes into play, things can get dark. Now, did Eddie hate his brother? I don't think he hated Al. He absolutely loved Al. We have more on tape about Eddie praising Al and loving Al than cursing at him. Can he get frustrated with his brother? Everybody gets frustrated with their own brother. That's part of being in a family. And I'm sure, Eddie had frustrations with Al, and Al had frustrations with Eddie, but this kind of shit you don't do behind the scenes. What did you make of what he said about Al, Dave?
I'm really surprised at yet somebody else piling on after Ed has passed. I mean, this has happened with Val, with Sam. Now Dave's getting involved. You're right. It's a very slippery slope.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's true, it's nobody else's business. So why are you even bringing it up now?
Yeah. It could also be taken out of context in the sense that maybe Eddie had a frustrating moment and just said something, but he didn't necessarily mean that. But to say that out there in a declarative way on a podcast when the guy is dead and the other guy's still alive, that's...
Right. I mean, I'm sure Ed said that about David Lee Roth all the freaking time.
Well, we know that. We know that.
And Ed and Al's relationship was such that, and more than one person has said this, they'd be fighting. Physically fighting like mad dogs.
Right.
And then, an hour later, they're hugging and kissing and making up. That was just their relationship. That's just the way they got along.
A lot of people have said that. Now, this is funny. We all know Dave loves throwing barbs at Sam. And he said, according to Sam, he was abducted by aliens. Now, let's be honest. Sam has put a bullseye on his back when it comes to this. He talks in crazy terms about being abducted by aliens and all this kinds of stuff. So he's kind of putting himself out there for this one. So this is kind of more funny than mean. But he says, I know when you're abducted by aliens, you get sex probed. Now, he knows that. Where is he basing this fact on? He's out of his mind. He says, I am compelled to solicit this sordid subject in an effort to explain Sam Hagar's conduct. For the last 10 summers, I haven't said a single syllable about him. Not one. I defy you. And in the face of a constant fart gas aimed in our direction here at the Mojo Dojo Diamond Dave Laboratories, and I think we've arrived at both the technical and medical answer that may have explained some of Sammy Hagar's conduct and his constant spew of diarrhea vitriol in our direction. Sammy Hagar was abducted by aliens, and he was sex probed. But what I do know is with the absolute accuracy is that if you take half of a popsicle stick and you jam it in a cassette player, no matter how carefully you extract it, the tape player will never play the same again. No matter how carefully you try and fix those delicate parts, it'll get worse, and it'll seem like the singer you used to be will stop making sense whatsoever. A lot like Sam. So, listen, Sam has ripped into Dave about not being able to sing, about not being able to remember lyrics, all that kinds of stuff. So I don't feel too bad about that. Not that he really should be saying that, but it's so silly that you can't really take it seriously. It's silly. I mean, we have no proof of aliens. We have no proof of sex probing. That's all hearsay and stupid. Well, what do you think of that?
This whole thing was so crazy.
Yeah.
And like I said, he was definitely getting press. It made the New York Post. A non-van-halen friend of mine sent that to me. It was like, WTF, right?
Yeah.
So he's getting what he wants. So, like I said, usually Dave is above this stuff, but he'll say what he wants to say. But again, it's always on his terms. So it's on the podcast. It's not during an interview.
Right.
He's throwing his shot out there, and you probably won't hear anything else again for a while. And no doubt that Sam will take the bait and say something. I'm just waiting to read that article next.
I know. It's true. Then he also admitted something which kind of makes sense as to why he's saying all these nutty things. He says he claims he racks up $92,000 worth of marijuana on his bill. He says, I smoke every day. I smoke my body weight. More than the gross national product of most of the emerging young African nations. He proceeded to get his business manager on the phone, on the podcast, to verify his cannabis spending. He says, Jerry, would you please share with my folks my recent bill for pot coming from the Silver Lake dispensary? She said, are you sure you want to hear this? And she said, $92,000. He said, the $92,000 pot bill. He goes, that's got to be a record. That's got to be special. That's got to be a world record special. obviously, he's smoking that much weed. He's whacked out of his gourd at this point. I mean, I can't even imagine that weed works with him because of all the years of doing this kinds of stuff. Very often, people who do so much drinking, drugging, smoking, all that kinds of shit, after a while, like, weed is like eating a donut. It's like, doesn't really have much impact. But apparently, he's fucking smoking like Snoop Dogg level of weed.
But, that's nothing to be proud about, that you have an almost $100,000 weed bill.
No.
By the way.
No.
I mean, you could be spending your money on a lot better stuff.
Yeah.
Like going to Japan, getting another tattoo.
Right.
Like whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
But you're literally smoking your money away? Like, really? I mean, if you got that much money, I guess you do whatever the heck you want. But I was just like,
listen,
okay, whatever, man.
He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have a wife or kids. I guess he can kind of do whatever the fuck he wants. So I don't know, but I tell you, it does explain why he's whacked out of his gourd. So there you go. Now, this is really dark. He talks about Ed's wedding, and he says, Ed and I both hated Valerie's family and her parents and her brothers. My gut just felt so bad. Number one, I'll tell you why. Because this was a real dart at Valerie and at Wolf, because obviously Valerie, it's her family, and Wolf is super tight with the Bertinellis, I mean, his Uncle Pat is like his road manager and his uncle, and so he's so tight with the Bertinellis. And they seem like a nice family, and God, that's so fucking shitty to say. He wants to go on the air and say, I hate the Bertinellis. I don't even care about that, and I'm sure they don't give a fuck either. But to say Ed hated the Bertinellis, that is so dark. That is so dark to hear. So I feel horrible for Wolf and for Valerie to hear stuff like that. Because
right, and honestly, there's a lot of professional skepticism in him saying that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, apparently there was a story out there where I think Ed and Val's father got to some kind of shoving match or something like that, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yes.
Okay, whatever. But I don't think Ed hated the family.
No.
I mean, like, you're going on a limb saying that. I mean, they were family together for years. And it's just like, come on, like, really?
But the thing is, even if he did, you don't get involved?
No,
I mean,
it's not. You know what? It's not even his family.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I agree.
I mean, this guy's got a kid. He's got a wife. I mean, these people are all existing. It's so shitty. And, he has no place saying that. Then he talked about the wedding party. He goes, I went into the bathroom to smoke a joint, and there was Ed doing a bump in his brand new 3-piece white tux that I paid for him to get. I paid $7,000 for him to have a custom-made Johnny Versace suit in 1980. What the fuck? Which is funny. Like, I mean, his phrasing is hysterical, but what he's saying is a little weird. So he said, when you do a bump, he says you sort of gack or spit up. He says, in a way, I guess because it's so intense when you absorb the cocaine into your body. And Ed asked him to hold him. So what he meant was, I'm going to do a bump, hold me from the gut, from behind, so I don't fall into the toilet because I'm going to spit up. And he says, I put my arm around his belly while he leaned over the toilet to prevent his jacket from getting in the water. And he says he'd do a bump and gack. He goes, then I let him go and he almost fell in the water. We were both giggling at how ridiculous we all look. And he was like, I don't want to go out there, man. And I was like, you gotta go. Then he starts getting into like, I started restructuring the lighting for the wedding. And I grabbed a basketball player and I had him remove some light bulbs. And I'm like, what in the fuck is he talking about?
No, wasn't this all in the bathroom he was talking about doing it there?
I think he was talking about the lighting for the wedding, but I don't
know.
No,
I thought he was talking about, like, they were in the bathroom doing everything, and then they invited everybody into the bathroom.
How could they invite everybody into the bathroom?
Well, apparently this was like one of those big bathrooms, because he said this place, I forget the exact word he used, but it was like an opulent Hollywood big type of place.
Right.
And next thing you know, everyone's going in there, and he's having the tall basketball player change the lighting.
Oh, is that what you saw? So listen to this.
Yeah, because Dave says, I like to direct everything, i.e. he's a control freak.
Right.
And since he couldn't control anything at the wedding, the only thing he could control was the lighting in the bathroom.
Okay, so that was weird, and I could hardly follow it.
Oh, no, either way, it was... The whole thing was strange.
I
seem to get deja vu hearing that story, though, because I thought I had read somewhere before how Ed had gotten, sick right before he got married.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. I mean, a lot of people do because they get nervous, but this is the part that was... It gets more and more brutal. He says Eddie Van Halen wasn't true to no woman, nobody, and no kind of thing except for two of them. A, his guitar, and B, going fast. Not for 1 second was this crazy brother from another mother true blue to any of his wives or anybody in between. He says one day Eddie called him up and said it was a bad day at family therapy. I left a VHS tape in my machine in my bedroom and my wife Valerie found it. David Lee Roth says, instantly I knew what he was up to because Ed and I grew up together. We turned 21 together. He says, we shared the same girlfriends. What do you think Women in Love is about? His girlfriend, which turned into my girlfriend, and my girlfriend, which turned into his girlfriend, ran off together. It was the 70s. A mighty time. You had to be there. So, I mean, that kind of stuff is funny and interesting. But he also said, in Ed's voice, she found the tape and saw what was on there, and I think we're finally going to get a divorce. And Dave said, I will not tell you what's on that tape. I'm not going to betray these kind of confidences, but I got to tell you, he called me every week for the next 6 weeks. Exactly 6 weeks later, that woman took every material item in her possession, including her son, and moved. Tore my heart out, and I felt so bad for Ed. And Ed said, and then he did Ed's voice, he said, Dave, aren't you into colorful things? Truth be told, full disclosure, my stage clothes, a little iffy. But me, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool retro-hetero. One guy, one girl. One guy, two girls. One guy, two girls in a toaster oven. Hey, I'm old enough to be kinky. They said, Ed, my brother from another mother, I don't care who you fuck or how hard. And he laughed, but Valerie wasn't laughing. She and her lawyers beat the shit out of that kid. She fucked him out of everything, and she left him flat and penniless. And he says the great Van Halen had to borrow $1 million and do the unimaginable. He was compelled to call me. And the weird part about the whole thing is his timing is all off. Because when Valerie divorced Ed, Dave wasn't in touch with him.
I was just going to say that. Maybe there was stuff obviously happening behind the scenes that we're unaware of. But you're telling me you're Ed Van Halen, and you need to call people to help you out, borrow some money till things get finalized or whatever. David Lee Roth is not on the top of your list.
I know.
Right?
I know.
I mean, it just seems so strange. And the fact he said Ed was left penniless, and this actually came up at EVH Con, and somebody pointed out, I don't think Ed was penniless because he still had the house and 5150 Studios.
Of course.
After all was said and done. He had his music and the rights to his music. It wasn't like Val did not contribute anything to the marriage either, because she had money too.
Right.
So even if they had to split stuff down the middle, the fact he was left penniless, I'm sure he lost a lot, but I mean, come on. Really?
None of that makes fucking sense, but more importantly, it's incredibly hurtful to Wolfgang. What in
Oh
the
my
fuck?
God, yes. I mean, and it's like he doesn't care. If he doesn't care about Val, I see where he's coming from.
Right.
But Wolf, I mean, the guy was a bandmate, for crying out loud. He's the son of the guitarist who was in your band. Maybe you guys weren't best friends, but you were still brothers of a sort.
The guy lost his dad. You gonna hurt him more? The fuck is wrong with you? It's just crazy. So then he went on to do the Sportsman's Lodge. This is where it gets really crazy. He starts talking about when he was there making 2 new songs, visiting back and forth. Now that's 96. But this shit that he's talking about, I don't know if it was happening in 96. It doesn't fit. He says Ed was wandering the halls like the ghost of Hamlet's dad. They've taken away his keys and he's living in his pajamas. Ed sneaks out. What does he commandeer? Anything with keys in it. So he grabbed the golf cart they used to use to move the garbage cans around, and he made it down to the Sportsman's Lodge. He says they can't find him because this is before cell phones were around. And then he went to the Sportsman's Lodge on Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. And he said it's a place where a lot of road crew used to stay. They went on the tours for the rock stars. Then he also went into San Fernando Valley, North Hollywood, Chatsworth, most famous epicenter for pornography. Huge warehouse space, 15 minutes away from the Sportsman's Lodge. porn stars used to hang out at the Sportsman's Lodge. And hanging out in the Sportsman Lodge in the mid-90s was Ed, and I was there, and I just missed him. And he goes, what's the perfect rock star solution for emotional trauma? Going on the road. Ed starts living at the Sportsman's Lodge, and he closes up his house, and he gets a room on the second balcony. And there's one large community there of rock people and pornography people. And Ed falls in with the porno crowd. They're good-looking, motivated, and familiar with Van Halen. Ed's in emotional disarray, and he meets his future second wife, Jane, in the pool. She's a publicist in the porn industry, and he says Jane decides she's going to organize Ed, and God bless her. Valerie has left him. Jane spiffs him up, shapes him up, shaves him, gets him a new set of teeth, and cleans up the house and the pool. And here's an idea. This place would be perfect for porn shoots. And Ed adds, I'll do the soundtrack. Now, during this time of which he's referring to, and there's some truth in some of this, just seeds of it, but I don't know exactly what is true. We do know that Janie was involved in the porn industry, not that she was a porn star herself, but she worked behind the scenes. And we do know that Ed did the soundtrack for a porn. I think it was called Sacred Sin or something like that. And then he did the songs Catherine, and then he did the song Rise, those two instrumentals. Now, the weird part about all of this is he's talking about doing the two new songs for the greatest hits. That's 96. But these songs are like, what, early 2000s or something like that?
Yeah, he's jumping across years, and the timing
he's all over the place.
Doesn't work. Although his story is interesting in that it does explain how Ed and Janie met.
Yes.
So if it's true, that's an interesting part we didn't know about. And interestingly, Dave always refers to her as Jane.
Yes.
And not Janie.
I know. Very strange. So that wraps up that whole thing with Dave. But I tell you what, a lot of people, a lot of fans, very upset by this. They're very upset because, listen, Dave has issues with Van Halen. Van Halen has issues with Dave. No problem. It's fine. It's all rock and roll bullshit. However, this is below the belt. This is involving someone's family. This is involving all kinds of behind-the-scenes shit. And a lot of people are left with a bad taste in their mouth from this. So I don't think he did himself any favors here, and I don't think he hurt anybody but himself. What do you think?
I don't know how his mind operates. I agree with you. I don't think he did himself any favors. I think he's smart enough to know that. I don't think he cares. And going back to what you said earlier, yeah, maybe he was just pissed at everybody, and he's like, all right, everybody wants to screw me over? No problem. I'm just going to spat off my mouth. I'm done with you all. No problem. Here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, wanted to talk to you about EVH Con. Dave went. It took place at Greenwich Music in Riverside, Connecticut, which is in the state that Dave lives in. How far was it for you to drive to?
It was about an hour and 20 minutes from where I live.
Okay.
Yeah, it's technically in Riverside, but it's really Greenwich, Connecticut.
Okay, and it's January 21st. So tell me, Dave, how many people were there?
There must have been about, I don't know, maybe about 30 or so people there, maybe a little more. There's people coming in and out and stuff like that.
And we had sort of some celebrities there. Number one, Gary Dell'Abate from the Howard Stern Show was there. What the fuck was he doing there?
Well, he was there because Steve Nowicki was there.
Right.
I think he works for Stern,
He does, yes, of course. Uh-huh.
He works for Stern, but it also turns out he plays guitar.
He's a hardcore Ed fan. Hardcore.
He is yes, and that's why he was there. And he was there on stage at one point playing a few Van Halen songs. Very good. Everybody who was there was very good. But yeah, so he was there, and Gary came by to say hello and support him. He wasn't there that long, but that's why those two guys were there.
Now, you also met Chris Gill there from the Eruption book and also from Guitar World, right?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I arrived there, I met up with our buddy Jim Bombas, the guitarist for Halen CT, who was talking to Chris, and I didn't know who he was. He's like, oh, we've spoken on the phone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we have? He's like, yes, you interviewed me for my book. You guys are the first ones to interview us because he co-wrote the book.
Right.
I was like, oh, you're... So I had no idea what he looked like. So I spoke to Chris for quite a while. Very nice guy.
Yeah.
Very much part of the California scene. And obviously, he spoke to Ed. So he had some great stories, most of which I'm not allowed to repeat on this podcast.
Really? Were they interesting?
But one interesting thing he did tell me, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school about this, is that at one point, he had proposed a book to Ed about doing a book about Ed's guitars.
Okay.
And him and Matt Bruck were going to work on it. And he had told Ed, all you have to do is let me sit down with you for like a day and just talk to me about your guitars. Because Ed had done that with him anyway, and Chris thought that would make a great book. He'd get a photographer, or Chris said he was a photographer himself. He could take the pictures, work with Matt Bruck, get a nice book together. Ed's involvement would be minimal. He'd be compensated well for his time, but Ed was not interested, just was not interested in that at all. Wow. So it never happened. But I thought that was a cool idea.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Chris had.
So now tell me, how long was it?
Well, I was there for about 3 hours, but it was still going when I left. So I think it went about 4 or 5 hours.
Okay, and what exactly goes on at EVH Con?
So what happens is they set up a stage, and anybody with a guitar goes up there with like a house band. There was one guy on drums the whole time. I think his name was Tanner. He was a friend of Jim's.
Okay.
And then there were a few rotating bass players. And then everyone would go up there and do like 1, 2, or 3 Van Halen songs as a tribute to Ed. And a lot of people had guitars that they had actually made. So I saw a couple of guitars that looked like the Bumblebee from Van Halen 2.
Okay.
Or, of course, the Red, White, and Black, the Frankenstein pattern.
Right.
Somebody brought a Kramer guitar that Ed actually played, because I know Jim got himself a picture with it.
Right.
And all sorts of stuff. So it was cool to see all the guitars that were made, and people went up there. In fact, there was one guy who went up there with his son, his 11-year-old son, who played keyboards.
Okay.
And his son played keyboards for Jump and Right Now.
Right. Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah, which is very cool to see. So they did do some Sammy Hagar era songs.
Okay.
There was a young lady there. Whenever a Sammy song was needed, she'd go up and sing them. But that was basically it. They would pay tribute to Ed by just playing his music. And so that's what went down for a few hours. So there were other people. We'd be hanging out and talking.
Were there people selling stuff?
No, nobody was selling anything. It was in a music store that, sells guitars and gives lessons and stuff like that.
Okay.
So they had basically cleared out the store to make room for people to stand around and watch the show. And it was very nice. It didn't cost anything, surprisingly. There was no cover charge or anything.
Okay.
You just showed up and listened to people play, and everyone exchanged stories about Ed.
Rumor has it that you went on stage and played Spanish Fly. Is that true?
I tried to, but they took the guitar away.
Okay.
No, I did not. I didn't play a thing, but they were nice enough to let me plug the podcast.
Yes.
So I got up there and I said a few words. In fact, I wore the one and only surviving Dave and Dave Unchained t-shirt.
Okay.
Which is now a collector's item because apparently you can't find yours.
I found it. I know where it is, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So one of two. So I spread the word. Some people knew about the podcast and said, thanks for doing it. We love it. And a few people didn't know about it. So they were definitely going to tune in. So that was nice to hear. In fact, Dave, I met somebody who we had met in Vegas.
Who is this?
That was Nick from New Jersey, as he calls himself.
Okay. All right.
And
nice.
so New Jersey Nick, as he's telling this story, I didn't recognize him at first. But then, it's kind of sort of coming to me because we met a lot of people when we were out there.
Right.
So it's all kind of like a haze. But we joked how we almost took the last flight out of Vegas because the pandemic happened.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Right after that. But he also went to see those David Lee Roth shows. So it was nice to reconnect with Nick. And in fact, I went on stage right after Nick had played. And you know what song Nick played?
What?
Come on, take one guess.
Unchained. That's right, yeah.
That's right.
Nice.
Right. Well, he did Mean Streets first, then he did Unchained.
Wow.
And that's when I told Jim Bombas, look, I'm going on stage right now. After he just did Unchained.
That's
so
cool.
Jim got me on stage,
Nice.
which is very nice. So I do want to thank the owners of Greenwich Music for allowing me to do that.
That
But it was
was
just like a
cool.
nice day
Yeah.
to celebrate the music and look at the guitars. which was crazy. And really, I asked Jim if there were any other guitarists there who were in Van Halen tribute bands. And I think there was only like one other person, but everybody else was not. They just liked Ed, and they had their Van Halen guitars, and they came up and they played well. It was really something to see.
That's really cool. Well, I'm glad you went. Thank you for doing the plug for the podcast, and it was nice that Jim got you up there. Did his band fully play?
No, what happened was normally they do.
Okay.
But Jim's band had a show the night before in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is in the complete other direction.
Right.
And they did a show, and he told me, he was like, it was snowing. You know, it was one of those things, and he's just like, the band was not coming the next day to Greenwich to play. So normally they're there, but they were not. I didn't get to see Jim play. Okay. Unfortunately. Okay. But he was there supporting everybody, and he knows the guys at Greenwich Music, so he's a big part of that scene.
And did Nowicki play?
Oh, yeah. He played a few songs. He did Hot for Teacher. He did Best of Both Worlds. And let's see, he did another one later. Oh, this was awesome. He did Romeo Delight.
Do they do these songs instrumentally?
No, there was a guy there who I think owned Greenwich Music or worked there or something like that. And he'd almost be standing on the side of the stage singing the songs. So most of them had a vocal. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah. And the sound was decent? Well, yeah, which is why I'm yelling right now, because I can't hear anything. Wow, okay. They had a sound system there that I think was in part of Ed's rig from one of the tours. Oh, wow. Yeah, it was very impressive. I did take some pictures, and I'll send them to you. The sound was pretty good. In fact, one guy had said, "Thank you for allowing me to play through that rig. I have never played through anything like that before." It was amazing. Wow. All right. Well, that's cool. Yeah, cool. Thank you for going, and thank you for doing the plug. That was great that you reported on that. I'm glad you finally got a presence in there. I would imagine it was a sausage fest, right? It was all guys? There was only one woman there, and she was the one singing the Sammy Hagar songs. Oh. It was definitely mostly guys, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I also wanted to note something that was a little mysterious. So, of course, we all know that Val loves publicity. And, you know, when Wolf got married, she went on the Today Show and talked about it, this and that. And now she has an expose in People magazine about photos from the wedding. And they show her with all her friends, and she's pictures with her and everything. But the interesting part was one friend took a selfie. One of those, like, where you hold it up, and she's taking a picture of the crowd, and her face is close up to the camera, and then you see the crowd in the background. Well, one fan blew it up and realized he found Al in the crowd, which was so shocking for so many people, because everybody kept wondering, was Al at the wedding? We didn't hear about Al. We didn't see Al. Al wasn't in any photos. No one spoke about Al. So in this quick selfie, someone zoomed it in, circled him, and put it online. He was in the back row, tucked away, very quietly tucked away. And it was really kind of shocking, like almost like a Where's Waldo, like, oh my God, there he is, you know, proving he was there. Now, he looked a little thin and a little almost like older, you know what I mean? And some people, I'm not saying this is true, but some people thought they saw a cane. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it was a drumstick, who knows? But it was very, very curious. Dave, what did you make of this? Yes, very interesting. Somebody pointed out, why is Al sitting in the back? Doesn't the family sit in the first couple of rows? Usually, but this is sort of a non-traditional wedding, and it wasn't in a church or anything. It was in the house, and maybe he wanted to be in the back. Maybe he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. We don't know what the relations are right now. There's a lot of skepticism. We don't know what's going on. But anyway, it was nice to see that he was there. Yes, in any event. Very true. Also wanted to note that Green Day appeared on the Howard Stern show, and during the interview, Billy Joel Armstrong spoke heavily about Eddie Van Halen. What does that mean? So in a new interview, Green Day was on there to promote their new album, Saviors, and they went on there for like a whole interview, and they played some songs, and then Armstrong started talking about his favorite band growing up was Van Halen, and he revealed that he cried when he first saw them at the age of 12 in 1984. He says it was like Eddie's guitar playing came from a different place. He reinvented how to play guitar, but it's also
about his songs. He wrote great songs. The main thing I took away from Van Halen were his songs are so fucking great. So he's been a fan his whole life. So then when they got back together with David Lee Roth, he said to his buddies, let's go on a road trip and let's go see Van Halen. And they all went to Kansas City and they had a pre-show backstage meeting with Eddie. And he said it got really emotional, which is bizarre. So he said when he got backstage, Ed had his guitar on and he says, while he was talking with me, he was shredding at the same time. And I was like, oh my God, not only am I meeting Eddie, but I'm standing right in front of him while he's shredding, you know? And he's telling all this to Howard Stern. Howard is obsessed with Van Halen. Everybody he talks to about Van Halen, so obsessed with it. So then Billy Joel said, I noticed that Eddie had these gigantic hands. And then Eddie said to him, you know, I got arthritis now and it really hurts, this and that. And he said it was really insane, but he started crying. And he was like, what the fuck is going on? So then he said the meeting became more sentimental. And he said he looked at me and he put his hands behind my neck and he goes, you're the only one that understands me. And he had tears coming down his eyes and he goes, I didn't know what to say. And he said that Ed said to him, people think I'm an alien because of the way I play. And I'm like, it's all about your songs. And he goes, exactly. And then Wolf came in while Eddie was shredding and goes, Dad, we have to go tune. And he said it was a nice father-son moment. He said, do you want me to tune to you or do you want you to tune to me? And they were going back and forth about tuning, and that was the end of the moment. But he shared that on the Howard Stern show. And Howard was like blown away by this. He was like, oh my God, because he loves hearing all kinds of Eddie stories. So I thought that really came out of nowhere. What did you make of that?
Yeah, that did come out of nowhere. I didn't realize he was such a big fan. It was another touching story about Ed around that time, because I think he said it was around 2007. I know Ed was like still battling some demons around then, but it was really nice how Ed connected with Billy Joe, and Billy Joe Armstrong just got it right away, and Ed recognized that. So I just thought that was like a very cool story he told.
Absolutely. Also wanted to let you guys know about a certain 4K transfer that came out from the 1978 concert that Van Halen did from their Niagara Falls concert. So Speedy Films, in collaboration with the Genesis Museum, has released 2 new updated 4K versions of Van Halen performing in Niagara Falls, September 8th of 1978. And it was all taken from Super 8 film. And what they did was they took Super 8 reels and then matched it up with the audio. But here's the thing. This is really amazing, but you have to kind of have a little patience here. So here's the deal. The audio is ridiculous. It's really good quality. Unbelievable show. It's about 37 minutes and change. I guess it's like an opening set. But what happens with it is they don't have the full show on 8mm. So what they do is every time they're missing a piece, the screen goes to black and it just shows the VH logo, but the audio keeps rolling. So the 8mm clips that they do have are so freaking amazing. It's sort of like when you used to watch cable and you could get a little piece of it and then it goes away and then a little piece of it and then it goes away. So it was kind of interesting, but the set list was amazing. It opened with On Fire, and it's incredible because the sound is unreal and the band just comes on like gangbusters. Roth is in this black and white striped pants with his big belt buckle. He's got his shirt open. He's got the silver jacket on. You can tell he just knows what he's doing, and the band is so incredibly tight. They did I'm the One, and you can tell that the guys are just so intense. The interesting thing that you get from this is a brand new band in the world of the music industry. They were brand new, but they were so seasoned. They were playing like they were rock gods who were already playing arenas. You could tell you would not want these guys opening for you because they would rip you to shreds. And Davis got so much confidence. Ed has so much confidence. It really gives you a taste for what they were like in 78. He went into Running with the Devil, Michael Anthony doing his bass solo with the bass above his head, the whole thumping thing. They showed this clip of Ed and Mike in sync rocking back and forth. The clips, the 8mm clips, they're absolute pure gold. They really are incredible. Went into Atomic Punk, Alex's drum solo. This is really wild. They show clips of Alex's drum solo and the lights are coming on and off, so you're just seeing like flashes of him. It really works. It's very intense. A Little Dreamer, very smoky, sort of bluesy tune. These guys were just such rock and roll animals, and my God, the beautiful bass playing that comes from Michael Anthony on this song with Eddie and his smoldering solos is so good here. So good. Went into Feel Your Love Tonight, Ain't Talk About Love, and you can tell that they were just killing it. And then, of course, Eruption. And then the weird part is the end sort of gets a little crazy because it drops out before it goes into You Really Got Me and then comes back and the sound is changed and they're into part of You Really Got Me where they do this really long jam, which was not common for Van Halen, but they did this really long jam. I tell you, you gotta check this out. It is a piece of gold. If you guys are fans, which obviously no reason to listen to this podcast unless you're a hardcore Van Halen fan, you gotta see this. It is Niagara Falls, September 8th, 1978. And you got to check it out. It was done by Speedy Films. Have you seen this, Dave?
Oh, yeah. What a treat. I enjoyed that a lot. I find listening to the whole show, even though the video's not all there, better than just watching the video. Because just watching the video, even with the corresponding audio, is very choppy. Because back then, you could only film so much before you'd have to switch to another tape or a Super 8 or whatever it was back then. But having said that, yeah, this is a band that's young and hungry. I did like that jam towards the end. That was kind of cool. Because that is kind of unusual for an opening band to start jamming like that. Because you don't have a lot of time. You're trying to bang on as many songs as you can as the opening acts.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, someone opens those vault doors. So that was definitely a treat.
For sure.
And I really appreciate all the work they put into making the video match up with the audio, which is no mean feat. And they even admitted it didn't quite all come together towards the end, but it was the best they could do because you can kind of go crazy because if the audio isn't quite recorded in real time,
right,
and the video isn't quite recorded in real time, and you're trying to sync it up, you'll lose sleep for hours and still not get it perfect. Yep. But even despite that, man, it was just great to see the band just starting out because, you know, there's like virtually no film of that.
Yeah.
So anything we can get like that is just freaking awesome.
It is. It's true. There was also this really cool podcast, which was like a video cast, actually. Modern Drummer, who was honoring Alex Van Halen's 2023 induction into the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame. And they had on Ray Luzier from Korn. And he was there behind Alex's kit from 2012. And they had him behind the kit. This is on live from Iron Shore Studios. And it was episode 2. They have Ray Luzier from Korn on there, and he thanked Alex for his years of inspiration. He said he grew up playing along with Live Without a Net. Obviously, Ray was the drummer for David Lee Roth for 8 years. He said 80% of the set list was Van Halen. He says those songs are in my blood, but he said he loved Al and he always was a big fan. But he said the rule number 1 with David Lee Roth playing with him was never drag. He goes, there was a time when he was playing with Roth and Roth got on the speaker and said, somebody take the bongo player to Starbucks, he's dragging. And he goes, oh shit, that's me. And he said, copy that. And he goes, and since then I played on top. He goes, I played alarmingly fast and I was always on top because Dave's perspective for the live show was go, go, go. And he says, David Lee Roth is one of the greatest entertainers who ever walked the planet. He knows a lot about showbiz. And he'd say, Luzier, he said, don't sit behind the drum kit like you're waiting for the bus. Give the audience a show. And he says, people are paying to see you too. He says, it changed my perspective on everything, and I play that way even on stage to this day. The interesting part was that when he toured with Dave, they opened with Hot for Teacher, but he said Dave would cut the drum part. So they would start with the guitar. So we all know the intro to Hot for Teacher would go into the holder, and then, Eddie comes in later. That's when they would start the song. So he says, listen, I wasn't about to argue with him. He's the boss. So that's what he wanted to do. But he also said he grew up in Pittsburgh on a farm, and he used to play Hot for Teacher all the time. And he said that he was a big fan of Greg Bissonette, and that Greg helped fuel the fire for him to get the gig with David Lee Roth. And he says Greg's advice to him was, Dave doesn't like yes men. Be yourself, be honest, but be loyal. The other thing he said was, Ray wanted to always do more Roth solo tunes because he was a big fan of those. So he said they were very close to adding Elephant Gun to the set back then, but it never happened. But he said David Lee Roth was a great boss to have. And then they dissected these Van Halen songs, and I thought it was so cool. There was a clip of him playing little guitars, a clip of him playing Secrets, clip of him playing Mean Street, AFU, and the Cabo Wabo. Interesting thing. OU812, one of his favorite albums. He loves that album because he loves the groove that Alex has in there. But it was a really incredible drum lesson. Definitely check this out. Ray Luzier, who I'm dying to get on the podcast. I've been trying to get him for years. But it's a really cool episode live from Iron Shore Studios. A tribute to Alex Van Halen. Gotta check that out. What do you think, Dave?
I enjoyed watching that video a lot.
Yeah.
Ray obviously knows his Van Halen. Great drummer, great at explaining it. Just an all-around nice guy, too. Normally stuff like that, because I don't play, I'm like, But, because Ray spent so much time with Dave and had to learn those songs, and he was playing behind Alex's drum kit, which was an extra nice touch. All of that just made for a really great presentation that they did. And I think they also did that with two other drummers. I can't remember who the one was.
Mike Portnoy was one, I think.
Well, Mike Portnoy was one. I recognize his name. I haven't seen that video yet. And there was another drummer whose name I didn't recognize.
Yeah.
If you've got about an hour or so to kill, or you want something playing in the background, I would definitely recommend watching that Ray. How do you say his last name?
Luzier.
Mispronouncing it the whole time. Yeah, that was great stuff.
Very cool. And he does a great David Lee Roth impression. I think he does a great Dave. It's so funny. He really gets a kick out of him. So he loved working with Dave. So that was great. Also wanted to let you guys know about Wolfgang Van Halen. He took part in Amoeba Music's What's in My Bag segment, which is like a video segment where he shops for a bunch of albums and he talks about why he has them. And one of the albums in his bag was Van Halen's The Collection 2, which is a 5 LP box set which collects all the Van Hagar studio albums and one extra disc of rarities. The interesting part about this was Wolf said not to delve into the exhausting argument of which singer is better. I'm kind of the mind where there's positives in everything. And if you hate one side or the other, it's like, hey, the same guy wrote the stuff. You can really find stuff to appreciate, and I really appreciate the melodic addition that Sammy added to the band with his music. I think it allowed my dad to explore a more melodic side of his songwriting, and there's great stuff on here. He also had the Beatles album Abbey Road on there, which he said got him through a very dark time in his life, which I'm sure is probably dumb to say because I think a lot of people probably said that at some point. But I think it's just a testament of how great the album is. I think I Want You, She's So Heavy is, for the time, one of the heaviest songs ever. Heavy is in the title, and I just love that was like metal before metal was actually existing. And I just think it's such a heavy, awesome song. And he said, Here Comes the Sun was a song that he played on piano right when his wife and him got married. And he says George Harrison is his favorite Beatle. I don't think he's everybody's favorite, but he's my favorite. Here Comes the Sun is his song. And it's one of the biggest songs, and I think it's just really kind of cool. So very cool to hear from Wolf and his choices there. What'd you make of that, Dave?
Yeah, no, I thought that was really cool, too. Absolutely.
Now, Joe Satriani was on the Hooks Rocks podcast, and he was talking about his situation where he's going to be playing with Sam, and then also talking about Alex's intentions with the reunion he was going to do with Alex. So he says, I didn't know Eddie, and I didn't know the family, and I don't think I'll ever understand David Lee Roth. I thought I really understood Alex, and I think I do. I really think I understand his point of view and where he's coming from. I tended to think the real difference here is that Sammy has a real sort of inclusive way of looking at life, and he noticed that there's conflict. That is getting in the way of doing something good, and he'll try to fix it. So as a result, it's just like he says, yeah, we're going to do a Talk About Love. I know it's not my song, but that's cool. Now you ask David Lee Roth, hey, are you going to do 5150? Of course he's never going to do it. There's a big difference there, is that you have one guy who is very flexible because he's thinking about the fans, and then you have the other guy who I don't know why Dave is so inflexible on a couple of subjects. I really don't, because I don't know him. I should ask Steve Vai about it. I mean, Steve knows Dave well. I can't say I really know him. He said Satriani isn't sure how committed Roth was to the tribute that he was going to do with Alex. He feels Alex had every intention of making it happen and for all the right reasons. He said, I felt Alex really wanted to do it, and his heart was pure in its intentions. But I don't know about Dave. I know that Sam and Mike, their intentions are pure. They really want to celebrate the music, and they're willing to mend any fence to make it happen on stage. They're the original guys. It's more than just a tour, and you feel that when you're standing next to Sammy and Mike. There's just an immense amount of power and love with the two of them and playing those songs. And people want to experience it, and they should be able to experience it. So that whole thing with Alex is so crazy. It really, really, really is. I can never get an answer as to, like, what happened there. Like, what was that going to be? It sounded like it was going to be a tour.
It did, yeah. You're right. It just seems strange why we didn't get a straight answer. But look, either way, I know Joe is going to do a great job.
Oh, yeah.
Because he won't let himself do anything less than that. So he's gearing up, literally. He's getting the gear, right?
Yep.
I mean, he won't be a clone, but I'm really looking forward to that show and seeing what he's going to do. That is going to be awesome.
I can't wait. So in an interview that Joe did with an Australian musician, he talked about his plans to play Eddie's parts. He says, what I learned from the Howard Stern show is you can't do gigs without rehearsals. And he's a little pissed off about that. And he said that Eddie had very specific gear. He didn't play with the gear I used, or Steve Vai, or Slash, or Tom Morello, or any of our contemporaries use. He actually had a very specific setup. He knew that in order for him to play those parts, he had to have his gear tweaked a certain way, otherwise it wouldn't work. So, like, when are you going to play the beginning of Mean Street? If your setup is not allowing those harmonics to jump out, it's going to sound like you're not hitting them. You've got to get the setup right. Now, he also said, live without a net or any of those things, even in the 5150 period, he's still using Marshalls. And when he goes to do things like that, it's a success. Every time he goes to hit a harmonic, boom, there it is. It's low noise, big round fidelity, still sounds organic. And then he says, by Tokyo Dome's 2015 album, it's a totally different thing. He's playing an entirely different amp. He also says, I know in my heart, I want to hear that sound in my head, that mythical Eddie Van Halen sound that we all sort of hear in our mind, and I want to be able to feel it. So he's very, very determined to get this right. And I think you're right, Dave. I think that Satriani is not going to embarrass himself. You know, Satriani's a scientist. He's a fucking guitar scientist. I think he's going to be the star of the show. I got to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a pro.
Yeah.
He's a pro. I can't wait. Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Going to be killer. Also wanted to let you guys know that engineer Ross Hogarth, he said that whatever criticism Eddie Van Halen faced for replacing Michael Anthony with his son in 2007 was unmerited. Hogarth recently appeared on the Anthony Marinelli Music YouTube channel, and he went off on this subject. He says, first off, everybody who knows Michael Anthony also knows he's just an awesome guy, a beautiful cat. Somehow there was all this animosity, but anyone who's a father and their kid plays music, one of Eddie's greatest joys was to play music with his son. One of Wolf's greatest joys was to play music with his dad. And now his dad is gone. Those moments would never have happened if Ed had stayed with Michael on bass. Everybody wants Michael Anthony with David Lee Roth, the original Van Halen. But there's nothing more than I want to play music with my dad. Plain and simple. I'm not going to get any further into dynamics, but I will say that to be around that beautiful joy, Uncle Al playing music with his nephew, Ed getting to play music with his son, it's what makes the family harmonies happen. He says you can't get rid of that sound. When those guys played together, there was a certain glue that couldn't have happened otherwise. So he's very, very defensive of that situation, but I tried to get Ross on this podcast, but he won't talk. So maybe one day we'll see what happens. What do you think, Dave?
I mean, we've had John Shanks on the show very early on, so we're trying to get the corresponding interview with Ross.
Yeah.
Ross always has great insight. I've read a few interviews with him over the years, and he worked very closely with Ed. And it's always really interesting that Ed always works closely with the engineers.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Because Ross was the engineer on A Different Kind of Truth, and John Shanks was the producer. And back in the day, he always used to work closely, not with Ted Templeman, but with Don Landy, the engineer.
Right.
Yeah.
And, Steve Rosen would say, man, because he's a tone chaser, man.
Right. Well, that's it. That's it, man.
Well, also wanted to let you guys know about a couple of releases that are coming out. Number one, Over the Edge. That is a Matt Dillon movie that featured the first Van Halen song to appear in a movie, which is a cover of You Really Got Me, for the movie Over the Edge, which is being released on Blu-ray in March. It's $27.99. It comes out on the 5th of March. It's going to be available in U.S. and Canada. That's the first time it's coming out on Blu-ray, so that's interesting. Also wanted to let you know, if you guys are looking for the soundtrack to The Wildlife, we got it. And it's not expensive. $15.99. You can get the double CD special edition of the Wildlife soundtrack from 1984. You buy it at cdsyouwant.com. That's cdsyouwant.com. And what it is you get disc 1 contains all 10 tracks from the original issued soundtrack, plus an additional 12 songs that were heard in the film. Then the disc 2 contains 7 remixes of the song from the film, as well as 12 incidental movie score tracks composed by Eddie Van Halen. So the tracks that you get from Eddie are on disc 2, and it's all fired up: Back to School, Driving Song, Fashion Destiny, Good Enough, Love Song, Out the Window, Peeping Tom, Ripley, Strike Down, Top Down, and closing credits. $15.99 2-CD set at cdsyouwant.com. So definitely want to check that out, right, Dave?
Yes, get it while you can, because I'm not really sure how legit that CD is.
Yeah, either way, just get it, because it's definitely worth getting for sure. And the last item for Van Halen news is our friend and author and podcaster Darren Paltrowitz. His book signing is going to be taking place at the Long Beach Public Library at 11 West Park Avenue in Long Beach on Saturday, February 10th from 1 to 3. And what he's going to do is, he has his book, DLR book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World. He's going to be there with host J.T. Turret, and Darren are going to talk about stories from the book and anything David Lee Roth oriented, and it's going to be followed by a musical performance from Benoit, which is going to be covering some of David Lee Roth's most famous songs. For more information on this, go to longbeachlibrary.org, or you can call 516-432-7201. I'm sure he'll sign the book and personalize it and everything for you, and I'm sure they'll be for sale there as well. Definitely want to check out that book from our buddy Darren Paltrowitz, who also does the DLR cast and the Paltrow cast. Well, that wraps up Van Halen news.
And that's the way it is. Good night.
And we are on to our interview with Simon Alkin, who is the current documentarian who is working on a series on Edward Van Halen called Edward Van Halen, a Musician. So really, really interesting. This guy is from Denmark. He's originally from Ireland, but he lives in Denmark. And he did this series that's coming out on YouTube. They're about 5-minute episodes about Ed's history, starting from his birth and he's going to lead it all the way up to the first Van Halen album. We're pushing for him to go further. He has a lot of experience working on documentary films, and when I tell you, folks, he does a really nice job. It literally looks like a television show, like 60 Minutes did it or something like that. So it's got a nice professional feel to it, very well researched, very well put together. We spoke with him. He's a nice guy, huge Van Halen fan. He had a lot of great insight. We talked to him about this series that we want you guys to watch and get into. For example, if you liked Alan Barry's series, which was phenomenal, you'll love this. Different than Alan's, different style, different subject, but this is really, really cool. Alan's was all about the 1984 album and mainly on the band, and as a whole, this is specifically about Ed, but you're going to love it nonetheless. It's just so, so good. So we're excited about that. But before that happens, we have the fresh mailbag of the year, and we go easy on Dave. We just do 11 letters, but we have a nice bag to get through, and we speak to all you guys to kick off this new year, and that's all coming up next. Take a listen.
My Van Halen stuff was, I was going to my first party in 7th grade, got out of the car, somebody dropped us off, a mother dropped me and my 3 friends off, we were walking, I didn't know this kid's house, it was like at middle school, and all of a sudden you were around strangers, and I remember walking up the street and hearing Atomic Punk going, and I was going, holy cow, what is this? And me and my friends were looking at each other like, what is this? And that was the first Van Halen moment, and man, when I found out David Lee Roth was a Jew, boy, that made me happy.
Oh, yeah.
If you need a dose of VH, get a taste of the closest thing. Romeo Delight, the ultimate Van Halen tribute band, playing all the hits from the David Lee Roth era, first classic 6 albums, plus deep cuts, some of which have never been played live before by the band. They even throw in popular tracks from the Sammy Hagar era and solo hits. The most viewed Van Halen tribute band on YouTube, Romeo Delight, doing customized recreations of staging, instruments, and costumes from the classic Van Halen era. They even perform entire Van Halen albums in sequence. Romeo Delight plays theaters, casinos, summer indoor and outdoor festivals, and special events. They're also available for private parties. To contact them, call Bud Blanche at 215-704-5144. That's 215-704-5144. Or via email at sonicparade1@yahoo.com. Romeo Delight, the ultimate Van Halen tribute band. The long-awaited Van Halen book from legendary rock journalist Steve Rosen is here. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. This is an over 400-page odyssey of Rosen's decades interviewing and being friends with the late guitar god, Eddie Van Halen. Rosen says, I spent 14 long, hard months writing Tone Chaser. It was both the most difficult story I've ever written and the most rewarding. I wanted to be honest and transparent as I possibly could, which was not always an easy thing to do. In the end, this was the most complete and comprehensive book I could have possibly written. There was nothing left to say when I reached the last page. With every word I wrote, I was reminded of the time I spent with Edward, and that hurt terribly. But it also brought back what a remarkable experience that was, and how insanely lucky I had been to have ever known him, and astonishingly to have been friends with him. I hope you can feel everything I felt. That is the purpose of this book. Pre-sales are currently going on now for the self-published book. PayPal Steve directly at scrosen@sbcglobal.net. That's scrosen@sbcglobal.net. It's $47 for those who are buying it inside the U.S., and that includes shipping. $95 for those who are buying it overseas, and that includes shipping. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. Don't miss out. Order it today. Check out the new podcast, The Rock Quarry, your place to hear in-depth interviews with some of rock's most colorful characters, with your host, entertainment journalist David J. Criblay. The Rock Quarry is available for free on Spreaker and iTunes. You can check us out on Facebook at The Rock Quarry Podcast, on Twitter at Rock Quarry Pod, on Instagram at The Rock Quarry Podcast, or email us at therockquarrypodcast@gmail.com.
This is Darren Paltrowitz, author of DLR Book and the Paltrowcast with Darren Paltrowitz, and you are listening to one of my favorite podcasts there is, Dave and Dave Unchained.
Pick up the new book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, by Brad Tolinski and Chris Gill. These music journalists share with fans new and old alike a candid, compulsively readable, and definitive oral history of the most influential rock guitarist since Jimi Hendrix. It is based on more than 50 hours of unreleased interviews they recorded with Eddie Van Halen over the years, most of them conducted at the legendary 5150 Studios at Ed's home in Los Angeles. The heart of Eruption is drawn from these intimate and wide-ranging talks, as well as conversations with family, friends, and colleagues. In addition to discussing his greatest triumphs as a groundbreaking musician, including an unprecedented dive into Van Halen's masterpiece 1984, the book also takes an unflinching look at Edward's early struggles as a young Dutch immigrant unable to speak the English language, which resulted in lifelong issues with social anxiety and substance abuse. Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, also examines his brilliance, who changed the face of guitar manufacturing. Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. Get your copy today on Amazon.com.
Need a laugh? Check out the Funny How Comedy Podcast, which focuses on upbeat conversations with legendary comedians. It's free on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out on Facebook at Funny How Comedy Podcast, on Twitter at Funny How Podcast, on Instagram at Funny How Comedy Podcast, or email us at funnyhowcomedypodcast@gmail.com. Pick up the new coffee table-sized book, The Decade That Rocked, by legendary rock photographer Mark Weiss. This 376-page book has hundreds and hundreds of full-color photos that Weiss shot through the 80s for magazines like Circus, Faces, and Hit Parader, featuring bands like Van Halen, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Bon Jovi, Skid Row, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne, and more. There's even behind-the-scenes stories to go with these colorful, eye-popping pictures. The Decade That Rocked, a new book by rock photographer Mark Weiss, is available for purchase now. Go to thedecadethatrocked.com, where there are exclusive bundles available with extra prints, t-shirts, and even patches. Inquire about the Van Halen bundle, especially made for Dave and Dave Unchained listeners. Order today. The Decade That Rocked. It'll rock your world.
Thank you, buddy. How do you do, all of you out there in Videoland? My name's Dave, but you can call me Dave. Yes, indeed. Hopping and bopping and popping with the best bet for the top of the pop smash gold at the boss beat with the timely tunes for those with the textured taste. Shut up, baby. No time to waste.
All right, Dave, you know what time it is.
Dave and Dave's mailbag is big and round. Dave says he's tired, can't lift it off the ground. Wants a light bag, likes those the best. And he likes the short mail better than the rest. And he said, well, I think that you're headed for a whole lot of letters. Well, I think that you're headed for a whole lot of letters. Well, I think that you're headed for a boatload of letters. And letter number 1 comes from...
That's right, it's mailbag time again. And we're going to go easy on you for the first of the year. We have a sizable mailbag, but not massive. So we're going to start with letter number 1, coming from Mario Aguilera from Joliet. He says, I'm sure you guys have a few Van Halen regrets. I do, and here they are. I regret not giving Van Hagar a chance and missing the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour with Alice in Chains opening up. But I did see the Balance tour and the reunion. I regret not seeing them with Gary. I saw it advertised and I didn't pull the trigger. Why? I guess because I had a frame of mind that it's gonna suck without even giving it a chance. I regret not buying a different kind of truth on vinyl. I was going to, and it just slipped my mind. And I remember Live Nation had a bundle with a VH hoodie. I remember it was one with the Indian head on it for the different kind of truth tour. And lastly, I regret not being born in time to experience the original band, kind of like Kiss. I envy all that got to experience the original Van Halen. Thanks again, Dave and Dave. Happy trails, Mario Aguilera from Joliet. Well, Mario's a long-time listener and a friend of mine. I kind of DM back and forth with him all the time. He's a great, great guy. Very nice man. I have some regrets of my own. I'll share those with you. They're based on shows that I missed. I regret not begging my dad to take me to the 1984 tour. I asked him to do so. That was a birthday gift. He said I could go to a concert. I asked for the Van Halen show, and the tickets were already sold out. I missed it by like a week or two. And he also refused to pay $50 per ticket. That was the scalping price at the time. The tickets were $14.50, and they were going for $50 a head. Now, obviously, that's more than triple back then, and $50 today is like free. But, you know, back then it was a lot of money. It was for my 14th birthday. He said, you got to pick another concert. So I picked Adam Ant, and I saw him at Radio City Music Hall. But then he proceeded to buy several Adam Ant tickets, and if you add up the money that he spent for the Adam Ant tickets, I could have gone to Van Halen. But to be honest, though, knowing my dad and you know him, I have a feeling he would have pulled me out of there because of the scene would have been filled with pot, and he was probably worried that I was going to get wrapped up in all of that, which I never did. But anyway, that was one, but that's sort of like something I couldn't even control. I was so young. I also regret not seeing the OU812 tour after the Monsters of Rock tour. Although the Monsters of Rock shows were better. They were longer, the set list was better. I regret not catching that after tour. Again, you know, there wasn't the internet at the time, and, you know, whenever there was a concert on a school night, my mother was losing her mind and had a heart attack every time I took the car. It was just like a whole fucking political situation. But I do regret that. And I do regret not seeing more shows on the 2015 tour. I caught two. I saw one in Connecticut with Dave, and then I saw one on Long Island. But I would have seen more had I known it was the last tour. But what about you, Dave?
Well, I knew you were going to tell that 1984 tour story, for sure.
Yeah.
And similar to you, to quote David Lee Roth, the only adventures that I regret are the ones I missed.
Yeah.
So I do regret not seeing Van Halen also in 1984. I really wasn't a fan of the band until late 1984 and the tour was over.
Right, yeah.
So I missed it completely, and I really wasn't going to concerts back then. So I missed the David Lee Roth 86 tour.
Yeah.
So I regret not seeing that. But the thing is, I'd rather not dwell on what I missed. Like, I'm excited for what I did see.
Right.
I didn't start seeing Van Halen until 1991 on the FUCK tour.
Right.
With you, actually. I think we saw them in Philly.
Philly Spectrum, yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. So those were great shows, and we saw David Lee Roth a bunch of times.
Oh, yeah, a lot.
And, you know, if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard our backstage stories about meeting David Lee Roth, which I will take to my grave. I will. Well, not that I'm hiding anything. I mean, we pretty much told that whole story, but that was fantastic. Yeah. So you win some, you lose some.
Right.
I'm happy to see what we saw. And I'm just glad we got to see Ed on that last tour.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, nobody knew it was the last tour.
No.
You know, they were doing well. Dave's vocals were iffy, but the rest of the band was good, and they were pulling rare songs deep out of the catalog.
Yep.
And it was just really great stuff. So, you know, you get what you get, and you don't get upset.
Right. And I tell you, it's kind of a miracle. I think YouTube is the coolest invention ever because you can literally see full shows from freaking 40, 50 years ago. That is such an incredible thing. I always say, because I have a smart TV, and I can literally sit in my living room and put on the YouTube app and put any Van Halen concert on my goddamn television screen and watch it. It's crazy. I mean, if I told a younger version of me that, they would never believe that.
The future is now, Dave.
Yeah, I know.
The future is now. Be careful what you want. You may get it.
That's right. Anyway, letter number 2 comes from, here he is.
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane.
It's Midwest fucking Ron. That's right. It's Midwest fucking Ron, and here he is. He says, here is some more on the lack of videos for the 5150 album. This paragraph comes from the book and is taken on the chapter OU812. And he pulls out this paragraph. It's from Sam's book. And he says here, we were also doing everything we could to boost album sales, which were excellent, but not what they should have been. As a result, we began producing music videos. Van Halen did not create any videos for 5150. Ed Loeffler decided not to compete with classic Van Halen videos. Furthermore, Warner Brothers declined to pay for the videos, which might be costly. Warner began to panic when we released the first single from OU812. They believed that if we had released a video at 5150, we would have sold 10 million instead of 7. And when the second OU812 single, When It's Love, came out, we were already on tour, and Warner Brothers eventually agreed to pay for a video. Loeffler was adamant that it be a performance video. There will be no acting. It had to be shot on one of our days off from the tour. That's a very telling paragraph and very frank. I have to agree with a few things, and then other things I contest. I find it very hard to believe that Warner Brothers wouldn't pay for videos to promote albums by a band as big as Van Halen.
I was going to say the same thing. That's shocking to me.
How is that possible? Now, let's be honest. We're talking about 1986 here. This is in the high time of MTV. You get yourself a nice video, you're going to get yourself some good album sales, because someone like Van Halen is guaranteed to get play. So missing out on that level of publicity is beyond me. It was clearly stated in that paragraph that they did not want to compete with classic Van Halen. That is no BS, and I'm sure Ed Loeffler made that decision for the band, meaning like he knew that Sammy did not have the charisma of David Lee Roth, and David Lee Roth was like the video king at the time, and it would probably be a black mark against Sam in selling the album and the tour if the video wasn't living up to the standards of the past Van Halen videos. The past 3 Van Halen videos were literally some of the most iconic videos of all time and still remain that way. So I believe also that he was correct in saying that if 5150 did have videos, it really could have propelled the band to a higher sales mark. He could have gone into a diamond status. Interesting enough, this is how hungry MTV was to have videos for 5150. When Live Went Out and Net came out, they created videos for all those songs. They created a video for Best of Both Worlds. They had a video for Love Walks In. And they had the Dreams video, as we all know, which was the Blue Angels video. And then on top of that, that was also riding off the popularity of Top Gun, so that kind of coincided because it had the same kind of jet fighters and stuff. And then when they played on an award show singing Why Can't This Be Love, which they didn't play on the show, they did one of those cut into a broadcast through one of their shows on tour. They showed a clip of them playing Why Can't This Be Love. Once that award show was over, MTV spliced that out and used that as a video for Why Can't This Be Love. So obviously they were hungry for videos and they were eager to play them. How Warner Brothers wasn't going to pay for them, there's something wrong there. I think Sammy has that wrong, but I think it was more along the lines of Ed Loeffler did not want to compete with classic Van Halen. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree
with
everything you said. Especially, David Lee Roth was an artistic force behind those videos. There was no way they were going to compete with them. But that would have been fine if they just released performance videos as videos. Lots of bands did that, right? It doesn't have to be this funny video or an artistic statement or anything like that. Quite frankly, they could have done what most bands did, which is put the band in there, put some fire in the background, some cars, some pretty ladies, boom. MTV video.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they could have just done that.
The
But they did
real-
not.
Yeah.
But they did not.
Yeah.
So, again, yeah, and I'm with you. It just boggles the mind that Warner's would not foot the bill. Because obviously, as you pointed out, MTV was starving for videos from that album. When they had that performance from the live show, they used that for sure. And then when they had the Blue Angels video, I mean, they latched onto that quickly.
They were so hungry to have Van Halen on MTV, they sent an entire camera crew to go on the road with them and film an entire special, which was the Van Halen Unleashed special, which, by the way, is one of the best documentaries ever made on Van Halen. I dined off that. I love that. I still think whoever made that did a brilliant job with that. That was unbelievable. What it was they went on tour with Van Halen. They did exclusive interviews with every member of the band. They interviewed the fans. They went on the road. They showed them behind the scenes in the dressing room. They showed them at sound check. They showed them on stage. They showed them traveling. It was the most comprehensive piece of film to this date ever made on Van Halen. It was the only ones that got that kind of peek behind the scenes. And that was brilliant. That was really well done. And apparently what I heard was that Ed Loeffler was trying to make like a mystique about them, like, yo, you want to see them? Come on tour and see them, you know, that kind of thing. And another part of me is wondering, was Warner's kind of trepidatious about selling the 5150 album? Not that it wasn't good, but just that it wasn't David Lee Roth, and, you know, you're putting the label Van Halen on it, and although Eddie and Alex are Van Halen, back then, David Lee Roth was so synonymous with the name Van Halen. You got to realize we're hardcore fans, but the average human being, you know, they have a certain flavor and taste of, you know, you put Coca-Cola on it, you're going to open up that can, it better taste like Coca-Cola. If it starts tasting like Mellow Yellow, you're going to be like, well, what the fuck does it say Coca-Cola on the side for? I know that sounds really elementary, but it is true. It didn't sound like Van Halen, and it really didn't. It sounded like another band, which is fine.
Well, I won't say it sounded like completely a different band. I mean, I would argue it definitely sounded Van Halen-like, with them definitely going off in some different directions with the keyboard songs and things like that. It's not like they sounded like Menudo the next day.
No, not Menudo. No. It just didn't have that certain bite or punch that Roth.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
No, that's true. That's true. Look, either way, they got very, very lucky.
Oh,
because most bands, you couldn't get in the door on the top 40 list without a video.
I know.
And somehow Van Halen pulled that off.
Yep.
And Ed and Al, they were no big fans of videos to begin with, so the fact they didn't have to do them, they were probably fine with that. And then when OU812 came around and they didn't do a video for Black and Blue, and that song didn't do too well as the first single, and the album wasn't really like coming out with a big roar,
right,
then everyone started getting a little nervous, and they were like, okay, we better make a video for this now. And then the song took off. I'm not saying the song took off just because there was a video. I'm sure it helped. Plus the song was, I mean, quite frankly, it was a ballad. It was more middle of the road. That's what helped it. But anyway, would 5150 have gone diamond? Would it have sold over 10 million if they had videos? Man, that's a tough call to make. Maybe. I would go out on a limb and would safely say it would definitely have sold a lot more albums.
Yeah.
And their songs would have charted better. Because the first single went to number 3, but the other ones were kind of like in number 20 land.
Yeah,
they didn't do that well.
Right.
So if they had videos for those, I think they would have been top 10 and they would have sold another million or two albums. But hindsight's always 20/20, and I hate playing the what if game anyway.
Right. It's just back then, they used to hammer videos. They didn't play them once a day. They play them multiple times a day. I mean,
I mean, I don't want to get too off on a tangent, but, you know, if you weren't being played on MTV, then it was very hard for you to be a successful top 40 act. That was part of the equation now. It just was. And artists like Duran Duran, for example, they did great videos. They were good-looking guys.
Yeah.
They were part of the musical movement coming out at that time, and they did very well. It changed the landscape.
Yeah, for sure. Letter number 3 comes from Han Casey Alford. He says here, Happy New Year, guys. Do you ever notice that Eddie Van Halen has made some close friends with some of David Lee Roth's former guitarists? He knew Steve Vai before he joined the DLR band, but was the first to call him before word got out to the public that he left the band and becoming fast friends. He also famously hung out with Jason Becker, giving him a guitar that he recently had to sell. Do you think Eddie was keeping tabs on Roth's six-stringers, at least in the early years of Roth's career, eager to jump in and offer his condolences as he knew what they must have gone through? Or was he just super cool dude, happy to just hang out with other guitarists? Also, was he known to have hung out with any of Dave's other guitarists? Cheers, guys. Han, Casey Alford. Well, Casey or Han, either whatever you go by, I think that Eddie loved bonding with fellow guitarists in the music community for sure, but I also think what you have pointed out is very curious. Perhaps he wanted to try to get some perspective. I believe, to be honest with you, Ed was completely and totally baffled by Dave. He could never get a read on him. Maybe he wanted to commiserate with some of these other guys, musicians who were more like him, and trade stories to someone who could understand and try to get behind Roth's psyche. Maybe he was wondering how he was treating them. Was he treating them the way he was treated? You know, Ed was a really sensitive guy, and he broke his ass on the band, and he really just didn't feel right the way Dave handled things. Never did. Never really did. But I think that Ed had a hard time with Dave, and I think that he did care for Dave, and he liked Dave, but he also had a hard time being his friend and being his bandmate. And I think, coming from the perspective of a fellow musician, maybe he could kind of connect that way. What do you think?
I think he was just in contact with people he liked to be in contact with. I don't think Ed was actively following up on David Lee Roth guitarists. I think he had friends who were guitarists who just happened to play with David Lee Roth. He knew Vai. I mean, I remember reading an interview Ed was doing, and they asked, what did you think of Steve Vai as a guitarist for Dave? And Ed gave his opinion. He wasn't like, oh, I don't know who this guy is. Good luck to him and whatever. Like, he knew him.
Of course.
He knew him. And I just think he had heard about Jason Becker and decided to help the guy.
Yeah.
And kudos to Ed for not being a jerk and saying, oh, he plays with Dave? F him. Good luck to him. Not like that at all.
Yeah, no.
I mean, as far as I know, Ed wasn't really friends or didn't know any of the other David Lee Roth guitarists.
I know, well, he did know Terry Kilgore. He knew
Terry. All right, no, I take that back. That's true. I'm sorry. I apologize. I forgot about Terry. Right. Well, him and Terry grew up together.
Right.
And they were part of that same scene.
Right.
So you're right about that. So they at least knew of each other.
Yeah.
But I don't know how buddy
no, I don't know
Ed
about
was
that.
with him, because I don't remember Terry mentioning that, like they were pals when we interviewed him.
Yeah.
But either way, I think Ed was just friends with whoever he was. I don't think he was keeping tabs on Dave. You know, quite frankly, I don't think he could have cared less about what was going on with Dave's solo career.
Yeah.
He was so hyper-focused on what was going on with Van Halen. He just had his friends, or he liked to help out when he could, and that's how he just happened to know a couple of guys that played with Dave.
And we've interviewed Terry Kilgore. We've also interviewed Brian Young. We've also interviewed
Jason
Becker, indirectly through passing notes back and forth because Jason can't speak. And then we've also had Steve Vai on several times. And then also we had Bart Walsh on, one of Dave's guitars. So if you check out those past episodes, you can look up what they said about Ed. I think they all had run into him or met him at one time. I know Bart Walsh had a story about Ed, this and that. Definitely check that out, our past episodes. On to letter number 4 from Baden McLeod. He says, it seems like the keys are pulled back, like you say, on David Lee Roth's new version of Just Like Paradise. I also like the sound of the drums on the new version. Sounds like the reverb has been changed. Baden McLeod. The Just Like Paradise revamped version by David Lee Roth was very hard to tell because You kept Steve Vai's guitar in there. All the instrumentation is in there, but it's sort of remixed. Dave's vocals are the same from back in the late 80s. I'm not sure even why he bothered to do this, but he must have had some sort of secret reason for doing so. Maybe it was bugging him and he wanted to correct it, but I thought he should have really re-recorded it like he did with the Van Halen covers instead of just remixing it. I don't know what that was all about. I thought that was a very strange move. What did you think?
I think it was just an early mix of the song. Dave stumbled upon it one day, and he's like, yeah, put it out.
Yeah, probably. It's probably like a demo.
I really think that's all that it was.
Yeah.
I just think it's an alternate mix that David shot down back in the day, or it was a working mix, and he was like, let's put this out and see what happens.
He seems to be going through his archives for sure. So.
Yeah, I mean, I said this before, I'll say it again. I cannot fault Dave for releasing stuff from his vaults.
No, not at all. That's definitely something to do, especially if you're in the mode that he is, which is sort of like a retirement mode. Letter number 5 comes from Florida Marcus Brixa, and he says here, hey Dave and Dave, I'm enjoying your December podcast, and you guys mentioned that you were unsure if Ed had seen Wolf perform with Mammoth WVH. You said perhaps a listener would chime in. Well, if I remember correctly, after the 2015 Van Halen tour, Wolf went out with Mark Tremonti, playing shows in clubs because their regular bass player couldn't do the tour. Wolf gladly filled in and went out with Tremonti for several weeks. There was a great photo of a sound check, and Eddie is in the middle of the room watching his son play on stage. Nobody really knew he was there. I think Val also saw the show that night, but the photo of Eddie watching Wolf is one of my favorites. I do not think Eddie ever saw Mammoth, though, as the band came together after he passed. Also, I love how Wolf completed a full-size arena tour with Van Halen, then traveled in private planes and custom buses, and then goes out in a van and a U-Haul with Mark Tremonti playing small clubs. There is no sense of entitlement with this dude. He just loves music and his fellow musicians. I love the show. Florida Marcus Brixa. Okay, cool. Well, yes, Ed did see Wolf with Tremonti. However, I could swear that I remember reading something about him and Val watching Mammoth rehearse. It wasn't like a gig, but they were like rehearsing or something. I think it's when he first put the band together. You got to remember, although it's not on the album, the band was together prior to Ed's death. Ed died in October of 2020, and then the album came out in, June of 2021. Now, of course, the band is not on the album. It's all Wolf. But he had the band put together. I remember he assembled the band. I don't know where I read it. I will have to try to find it. But I remember it was something like Ed and Val were like sitting away from the band and watching them rehearse. I remember Ed saying, "Can you believe this kid?" or something like that. And him and Val were kind of swooning over their son. And I thought that was just sort of a sweet moment. I just remember reading that somewhere. I just don't remember where the hell I read it. But it was definitely out there. But thank you for noting that Tremonti tour. Yes, for sure, that photo was out there, and Ed was definitely out there seeing him and supporting his son when he was out there playing with Tremonti, and Val was doing the same thing. What do you think, Dave?
That is exactly what I was thinking of. It had to have been. It was definitely that Tremonti show.
Right.
Because he definitely wasn't touring with Mammoth yet.
No. Definitely not touring
right,
with Mammoth.
Yeah, so Ed was checking him out at a Tremonti show, and he was just like standing there, and like nobody saw Ed there.
Yeah.
And it was crazy.
Yeah.
So yes, thank you for putting me back on track. It was definitely the Tremonti show. So thank you for that.
But am I losing my mind? Did you hear or read
You're definitely losing your mind. I think aliens have implanted that memory in your head. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I really don't know where you're coming from.
Okay.
On that one.
All right. Well, we'll see if any listener remembers that as well, or if that's something I dreamt up during an afternoon nap. Okay. So
contact.
It's all it takes.
Right.
Exactly. Letter number 6 comes from Robert Main from Las Vegas, and he says, love the pod, a few things, and I'll keep this short. Number 1, you were trying to figure out if Ed ever saw Wolfie play with Mammoth live. You thought you recalled a picture. I think you were probably thinking of when Wolf was in Tremonti, and I'm probably the 100th person to point this out to you guys. Number 2, don't know if you caught this, but in David Lee Roth's Talking Christmas Blues, the line, I'm supposed to light the menorah, is a funny nod to his mention in Adam Sandler's The Hanukkah Song. Number 3, and my main reason for writing, is this. I find it interesting that after decades of playing exclusively with Sammy Hagar, as soon as Michael Anthony mentions he's stepping out from Sam's shadow and putting a band together, Sam conceives this Best of All Worlds arena tour, featuring Mike playing and singing some of the most iconic early Van Halen songs, probably delivering a pretty good payday for Mike. Sam must have realized that his claim to the Van Halen legacy would fade pretty fast without the lineage that Mike provides. Hate to pile on Sam, but it's just an observation I wanted to throw out to you guys. Keep rocking, Robert Main in Las Vegas. Yes, Robert, thank you for your input. I appreciate that. Yeah, of course, we just spoke about Wolf with Tremonti, so we're good on that. Thank you for pointing that out. Number 2, of course, David Lee Roth lights the menorah is the famous opening line to Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song, which is why Dave mentioned that in his Talking Christmas Blues song. I think Dave, my partner here, mentioned that he thought that was hysterical. Perhaps we didn't explain that well enough, but we thought you all guys would know that.
Right, yeah. No, that's why it was one of my favorite lines in the
funny.
song, because it was definitely a throwback to
absolutely
the Adam Sandler
hysterical. Song. Typical Dave humor. And number 3, and most importantly, I want to commend you, Robert, for pointing this out, because this is a really good point. Michael Anthony last year was talking about doing a side band with Phil X of Bon Jovi and John Douglas, who is currently drumming in Aerosmith. And he said, I also have a really cool singer on board, which he was sort of keeping quiet. Then nothing came of it. That was back in March of 2023. We never heard anything about that. So this is very curious. And perhaps you might have struck a nerve there. All of a sudden, Sammy's open to playing old Van Halen songs. It's very, very curious. It's good detective work, Mr. Main.
Oh, is it conspiracy time
No,
again?
no, this is not conspiracy. I'm not bringing this up. I'm merely answering a letter. This is his point. I'm trying to tell him that I think it was good. Maybe the Red Rocker was worried about Michael Anthony was going to run away with the Van Halen juice he needed, and he sweetened the offer. I'm curious to see.
So? You think so? I mean, because I think Sam would have went in that direction whether Mike was going to do that solo thing or not. I mean, he was definitely going to call Joe. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I'll give him that. Did Mike inadvertently create a bargaining chip? Let's say Mike did get that band together. Let's say he does do that. I still can't believe that he wouldn't go with Sam and then do the Sam tour. I mean, I feel like the Sam tour was going to happen with Mike, whether Mike went on his own or not.
Okay, but let me just say this. I do think that it takes a little bite out of it if he goes out there and starts doing it. Obviously, Mike would never do it at the level that Sam is doing it. I think that Sam is like, let's save that chip and do it this way. We could do it on a bigger scale. We'll call in Joe. We'll kick out Vic and call in Joe, and we'll keep Jason on drums, and we'll make it a big ordeal. I don't think it's like, oh, let me just give you a little kashish on the side not to do it. It's not so much that. It's that Sam is the one who came out and is doing this quote-unquote Van Halen tour. It's so weird because he's so murky about the way he's selling it. Like, it's the Best of All Worlds tour, and everybody's calling it the Van Halen tour, and he's redoing the logo to look like Van Halen, and he's promising all these songs, but he's like, oh, I'm still going to do my stuff and everything, and we're going to do Joe's stuff, and it's like, wait, what's going on?
He is the best tightrope walker.
Oh, yeah.
Ever, because he's really walking that fine line. He doesn't want to say this is the Van Halen tribute tour.
No.
It's not, but it's pretty darn close.
He's getting, he's getting as close to the line as he can without getting in trouble. I think the band is going to be great. All those guys could play really well. I'm just wondering what he's going to present. You know what I'm saying? Like the last time you and I saw Sam, which was in Connecticut in the summer of 22. He did a lot of Van Halen songs. I mean, he did a good 9 songs. So is he literally going to deliver like 15 like he's got to come up with something significant.
Dave, I really think set list wise it's going to be similar to what we saw before, except there's going to be, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 more Van Halen songs in there.
Yeah.
And then 5 or 6 songs from his solo career go out the door.
Yeah.
There's the fact that Joe's in the band now and he's really trying to do justice to it. So performance wise, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Is the show going to be longer? I don't think the show is going to be longer. I mean, if it was an evening with Sammy Hagar, then yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but
that's
he's
the
got
thing.
Loverboy is the opening act.
Yeah.
And Loverboy is not a 20-minute opening act, right? You know they've got to be going for at least like 40, 45 minutes. So how much time does that leave Sam? I'll give him 2 hours, and he can cover a lot of Van Halen ground in an hour and a half for sure. But yeah, like you said, he's packaging this like, I'm pulling out all the Van Halen songs out of my ass that I never did before. And it's like, Sam, like we went over the stats last time. I'm not going to bore everybody with that last time.
Yeah.
But it's not like you were doing 3 Van Halen songs. I mean, what would be amazing is if he actually did a decent amount of David Lee Roth songs. We'll see if his ego can handle that.
I got to be honest with you. I don't think he's going to do any David Lee Roth songs. I think Mike is going to do them. What's going to happen is, and you think about it, and I see this all the time now on these tours with these older guys, right? They need breaks. So what they do is, like I've noticed with the Stones have shortened their show to about 19 songs. 2 of those songs go to Richards. So Jagger is going to be playing 17 songs. And that's what happens. Now you say, whoa, doesn't Keith get a break? Well, listen, Keith is hanging out playing guitar. He's not running around the stage like Jagger. The lead singer definitely carries a lot of weight in terms of exhaustion. So they definitely need a break. And that break is pretty fucking long. Now, I think what Sam is doing is he's ushering in a break. He's going to have Mike sing 2 Van Halen songs. I think you're going to get, my guess, is you're going to get a known one and you're going to get like a album track one. So you maybe get like Ain't Talking About Love and then Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Or you'll get like Panama and you'll get DOA or something like that. I think that's what's going to happen with Mike. Then Sam gets a 2-song break. I also think he's going to get a break because Satriani is going to get a solo. He's going to come on and he's going to do like Surfing with the Alien. I'm not kidding you. He already said it. He's going to have a Satch song in there. Maybe, he'll change it up from night to night. But, he'll do one of his instrumental songs and maybe he'll throw in like a little clip of Eruption or something like that. You add up all that time, that's going to give Sam a nice little break. That's what he's going to do. So that's definitely going to happen. And I think, like you said, the fact that it's not an evening with, I would have done an evening with, and I would have done 2 sets and done like a break in the middle. You know what I mean? But I don't think Sam wants to play that long. I mean, look, the guy's 76 years old. It's hard to do those shows. They're exhausting. Look at freaking Steven Tyler. They had a huge Aerosmith tour. 2 dates. Canceled the rest of the tour. I mean, that tour was going from September all the way through to like March. They got through 2 dates and they canceled the rest of the tour. And they're still trying to figure out when they're going to reschedule. They're thinking, maybe late fall. Are you kidding me? It's crazy. And meanwhile, they're hanging on to
after COVID and everybody had to wait a couple of years for the shows.
Yeah.
Now, that's like normal. They're like, we'll just hold on to the money and we'll reschedule it a year from now. People can wait, which is complete and utter BS.
Yeah.
You should be canceling the show, canceling the tour, and then reissuing the tickets all over again. Meanwhile, they hold on to people's money.
Yeah.
Earn the interest on it,
Yeah.
and not to be an accountant on this show.
Yeah, it's the truth.
But doing that now is better than it's been in years because of rising interest rates. It's a complete game now. I mean, it's BS.
Absolutely.
But when you're Ticketmaster and Live Nation and you have monopoly over everything, you get to pull this kind of BS off.
Now, well, the other thing is, forget about canceling shows. Forget about that. The new thing is they want to sell shows a year in advance. Hang on to the money and get the interest on it the entire year. It's incredible. They're putting tickets on shows for next fall. It's like, dude, I mean, we never used to have that. Shows used to be announced. I just interviewed an old concert promoter, Larry Vaughn from Long Island. He said maximum 2 months ahead of a show. Maximum.
I remember that name. He was big time, right?
Huge. Are you kidding me? Did Zeppelin at the Garden? His song remains the same. That was him, that tour. He's done everything you could imagine. He did the Police at Shea Stadium. I mean, he's done big shit. He did Pink Floyd The Wall at Nassau Coliseum for like a week. I mean, it was crazy. He used to say, you never sold something more than 2 months in advance. Ever. Like, people wouldn't have it. You know what I mean? Now, like you said, it's common. I mean, they sold Jones Beach tickets for next summer months ago.
Wow, that was like a springtime
they're
thing.
They're still sweeping up from the summer. They're putting tickets on sale for the following summer. And I'm not even talking about like June. I'm talking like September shows. It's crazy, but that's what they're doing. Anyway, letter number 7 comes from Jeff Newhouser. He's known as Nuke. From Copley, Ohio, and he says here, I'm a longtime listener of the cast. I just finished listening to episode 96. We had a great interview with Darren Paltrowitz. My question is concerning the Best of All Worlds tour this summer. My brother and I have 6-row seats at the Blossom Music Center on July 29th. This venue is outside of Cleveland, and the following night in Cleveland, there is a concert that includes Def Leppard, Journey, and Heart. This tour has 2 nights off before their show on the 30th. I was wondering if anyone from these 3 bands will do a song or 2 with Sammy. I'm guessing Neil Schon and Nancy Wilson are the 2 that are most likely, since Sam has played with both of them in the past. Would love to have a mini Hassas reunion for a song, or perhaps a Zeppelin song with Nancy. Would like to know what you guys think and what special guest is most likely for this scenario. Keep flying the Van Halen flag, fellas. Jeff Newhouser from Copley, Ohio. Well, Jeff, it's nice to hear from you, and it's a nice call on that. My guess is you see Nancy, perhaps she'll do something too high for Sam, because she has a female voice. Maybe she'll sing like When It's Love. That might be cool. Maybe
Dreams.
Dreams? Oh, they're so afraid of touching Dreams, though.
I know, but if she can pull it off.
Well, yeah, if she can pull, that's really, really super high, though. I mean, maybe
just
if she
a possibility.
Maybe if she can, that'd be great. Maybe Neil, if he comes up, would do a Hassas song like Top of the Rock. That would be amazing.
That would be killer.
Absolutely
that would be
amazing.
Awesome.
And I'm curious just to see, to be honest with you, how many guests we actually get on this tour.
Yeah, I've been asking myself that, because Sam's been talking that up. And he's got lots of friends, and I'm not saying people aren't going to come out, but, like, I really wonder how long that line is.
Well, here's the thing about this. Everybody who ever says this always comes out with all of these delusions of grandeur. Oh, we're going to have... And it never happens. For Christ's sake, Kiss toured for years on the End of the Road tour and said, oh, we're going to have members of the Kiss family come up and play. And neither Ace, neither Peter, or Bruce Kulick, or Vinnie Vincent, or anybody from the past, you know, Eric Carr has passed away and Mark St. John has passed away, but none of those guys that I mentioned were ever brought up there. No one came up and played. I mean, first of all, I understand you got beef with Ace, you got beef with Peter Criss, but Bruce Kulick can't come up. You know, Vinnie Vincent, you know, I know you got beef with him, so like it's just, you know, there's issues with everybody, but I just saw an interview with Bruce Kulick, and he's like, I never got a call. He goes, I wasn't even invited to the shows at the Garden. And he lives in New York. Like, not even like, hey, why don't you come celebrate, you know, we'll set you up with a ticket. Like, nothing. Just nothing. So,
I really think Kiss was looking forward and not looking backward on those last shows.
I understand that, but if you're ending, you got to do something.
Oh, no, I agree. But they purposely did nothing.
Right.
It's not like they invited some and not others. They did not invite anybody.
No, I know. They don't give a fuck. So here's the thing. I think it's a good call. You might have a good chance of seeing Nancy or Neil. It's also interesting, and I think everybody should check this out. If you're going to the show, do what Jeff just did. See who's coming around you at that time and who could be potential guests. Let us know if you think you have potential guests. These two are perfect because they're friends of Sam. He's played with them before and they're going to be in town. But you know what? It's not so easy to line up. This isn't like a club that's in town and it's down the road. Everybody's on tour. There's all kinds of different things. but it's easier for a musician like Neil to jump on and do something than for Nancy. She's probably got to go for sound check and, run through the song. But, she can do it. She certainly could. It'd be great if she did. I'd love to hear her voice on some of those Van Hagar songs. I've heard some ladies sing some of those Van Hagar songs, and it sounds great. A couple months ago, I mentioned one of those tribute bands that we mentioned in the Van Halen news. A woman sang, I think it was Love Walks In or something like that, Dreams. They sound fantastic because they have high voices, and it really works. So it's a good idea to check that out, and good that you did that, Jeff. Thanks for bringing that in. Letter number 8 comes from Mike Drab, and Mike says, Happy New Year. I've always loved this podcast, and I just wanted to add a little color to something that was said. One of you was wondering if Van Halen performed Running with the Devil on the 1995 Balance Tour. Obviously, I can only answer for the show I was at in Maryland, and the answer is sort of. They were playing You Really Got Me, and the band started to jam a little bit. Suddenly, Eddie started playing the beginning of Running with the Devil. The place erupted in applause, and we were all stoked. Then right as Sammy was about to sing, they went back into their jam. This was the only time I've ever heard Van Halen get booed. The crowd was angry. The guy in the front of me turned around and looked at me and said, This is kind of like a dry hump, man. I had to laugh because he was right. On the way out of the show, people were still talking about it and how they should have finished the song. Just throwing that out there, I always thought it was a crappy thing to do since the crowd obviously wanted to hear the classics. Mike Drab. Well, Mike, I totally agree. That was a great story, by the way. This is not cool at all, and I hate when bands do that. As far as I'm concerned, when you're a legacy band like Van Halen, you have a sense of responsibility when you're playing live in front of fans to play certain songs that really tend to your legacy. Running with the Devil is one of them. They played Jump, Panama, and Ain't Talking About Love on that tour. But obviously, Running with the Devil is something people would love to hear. But here's the thing. I checked the set list from Maryland that Mike went to, and they played Ain't Talk About Love, Panama, and Jump, but of course, what did they do? They played an equal amount of Sammy solo songs. They played I Can't Drive 55, There's Only One Way to Rock, and Eagles Fly. But teasing the crowd is a recipe for disaster. To be honest, I think the band, meaning Mike, Alin, Ed, wanted to play some of that old stuff, but I think there was some sort of contract agreement. Like, if we're going to do 3 Van Halen songs, we got to do 3 Sam songs. So by jamming a little bit, they can get their fix in there, or perhaps they wanted to piss off Sam and put him in a bad position by teasing the crowd and then letting him deal with the angry mob. So who knows? That Maryland show was in August of 1995, and perhaps they were getting a little bit tense with Sam because that was later in the tour and close to when things started to explode. What do you think, Dave?
I don't think they were trying to embarrass him, but I think they were strongly encouraging him to demonstrate that the fans wanted to hear the old songs.
Yeah.
And that perhaps maybe he should start considering to sing, right?
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. Ed knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He starts that song. Al's going to start drumming it right in. Obviously, Mike knows the bass line. They play it, and then they stop right before the vocal. So who's the bad guy?
Yeah.
Who's the bad guy?
Exactly.
And by the way, you can't blame Sam because does Sam know the words? Maybe he doesn't know the words. It's not fair to him.
Well,
So
no, wait. They've done it. They've done it before on the Monsters of Rock tour.
I know. But listen, if they haven't practiced it and he doesn't quite remember the words and he doesn't sing it, then that makes him look like the dick.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what happens. Now, what's he going to do? Half-ass sing the song? He doesn't want to do that either.
No, I
so
know.
these are just the guys getting testy with each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's what that is.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, maybe 2 months ago when I did Van Halen News, there was that little story from Jimmy Kimmel about the wine situation, that Sammy was putting wine on their rider and then shipping it home. That was that tour. So maybe things were getting tense. So letter number 9 comes from your buddy Dave Simiak Solaju from Tehran, Iran. And he said, Happy New Year, guys. I'm so glad you mentioned Sebastian Bach's way of saying Van Halen. I got goosebumps all over my body when you said that, and it made me happy that we got that salute from the Eddie Trunk 40th anniversary show, which I've watched 4 to 5 times. As we all know, Bach is a big Van Halen fan. The way he shouted Van Halen in a code was from his high school days for Everything Cool. Speaking of school and high school, how was your high school days? Were you into the genre we all love? How about your classmates? Did you guys really write Van Halen logos on your books and notebooks? Did they really make fun of Kiss fans and break out in fights and debates the way Eddie Trunk always talks about? Someone once said Dazed and Confused movie is the atmosphere that is similar to that time. If so, the 70s and 80s was a golden era. God bless you. You know Darren Paltrowitz's 2-hour Van Halen show was golden. Super cool and friendly talk, commenting on the stuff I love. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your loyal fan, Simiak Solju from Tehran, Iran. P.S. What do you think about Kiss's last concert and its future? I mean, the Avatar thing. How do you think they will sell this? Well, Simiak, I went to private high school. There were some Van Halen fans there, but there was a lot of, I'm going to say my high school was mainly like U2, Bon Jovi, and Billy Joel. That was very heavy there. Yeah, of course I put Van Halen logos everywhere. I was constantly drawing the Van Halen logo, always trying to perfect it. I actually wrote a review for OU812 in my high school newspaper as I ended up graduating. I was co-editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper, and I had my own column called Criblet's Corner, and I reviewed OU812 for the last issue of the year, which was June of 88. The Dazed and Confused vibe from that movie, that's more like late 70s era, probably more like public high school type of vibe. That's for sure. Mid-80s was different. That's when I went to school and graduated late 80s. I'm glad you enjoyed our interview with Darren. That was fun. And definitely check out his DLR book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World. You can get it on Amazon. Regarding the Kiss show, the last show, I went to the second to last show in person, and I saw the last show on pay-per-view. I thought the energy of the first show was way better. And the last show really didn't have anything special about it. There was nothing wrong with the show. It was a very good show, but there was no sense of history, and there wasn't any special set list. There wasn't any special song. It was a little bit flat in that regard. In terms of the avatars, it's really a mystery. This is not going to happen until 2027, which is over 3 years from now. I have no idea what kind of technology will be available at the time. And here's the thing, the crazy Kiss fans are gonna be too old or not give a shit at that point. So I don't know who they're going for, because I don't see like young people being into Kiss. I don't have super high hopes for this, but to me it looks like a video game. I could barely get through that last video that they played at the end of the concert. It just seemed like watching Grand Theft Auto. It had that kind of like weird video game animation to it, you know? It just seemed very strange. But, you know, the Avatar thing is going very well overseas for ABBA. ABBA has an entire show running that's doing really, really well, and I don't know. It's hard to even tell if this is even going to be a thing. It's kind of a 50-50 shot. What do you think, Dave?
I think they're going all in on that.
Yeah.
But like you, I'm curious how that's going to pan out
in
3 years. I don't know. That's a tough call.
Yeah.
But if Kiss can make money off of it, they will definitely invest in it. And as far as high school, I too went to a very snotty private high school. But I will tell you, there were quite a few metalheads at that school.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying about U2 and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
there definitely was a lot of that.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a fair share of people who were into heavy metal and hard rock and stuff like that. So Van Halen was appreciated. I remember there was somewhat of a big deal when Dave left and Sammy joined. I do remember like around 1991 when For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out and Van Halen was back to being a guitar-oriented band. You know, except for right now, the keyboard songs were gone. That was a big deal. That really was a big deal because Van Halen was rocking again.
Yeah.
Because Dave and I were in high school from 84 to 88.
Yep.
So it's kind of like the tail end of the David Lee Roth era and the first two Sammy Hagar era albums. So by the time 91 came around, we were in college by that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really more of a college memory I have of For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Those are my school days memories of Van Halen.
You're not going to believe this. I don't know if I told you this before. I think I did, but I'll tell it to you again and for the podcast listeners. So get this. I went to school with this guy named Mike, and he kept saying, "Oh, my uncle works for Van Halen. My uncle works for Van Halen." What the fuck? Like who? You know what I mean? Like, he didn't even live in California. It's like, well, what do you mean your uncle? Like, who? People walk around and say all kinds of shit in high school. You know that, right?
Right.
And this guy's last name was Mike Leffler.
Oh.
Wait a second. And at the time, I'm 16. You know, I didn't know about management and, like, who was managing Van Halen, all that kind of stuff. I wasn't deeply involved. So, I don't know. I'm in college, maybe, and I'm reading liner notes when I was more deeply into the band. I had an aha moment, and I was like, Ed Leffler, wait a minute!
So he was telling the truth.
I couldn't believe this. Ed Leffler's nephew, Mike, went to school with me. And I didn't make that connection to, like, college when I was reading, like, liner notes. And I was like, wait, what?
You could have had it in.
We'll go back to the first letter to Mario, one of my high school regrets.
Oh, there you go. Right.
Yeah, no.
Didn't you go to school with Keith Richards' son, too?
Oh, my God, yeah. I went to school, and I'm so embarrassed to even talk about this, but I'll tell you just for the entertainment value. I went to school with Keith Richards' son, Marlon, and apologies to Marlon. So anyway, he ended up, like, I don't know, he was, like, bullying me about something, and he, like, trashed my locker. I don't remember what the circumstance was, but it was kind of really like a really shitty prank, and he like fucked up my locker pretty bad. So this is what I did in return, and you're going to laugh when I tell you this. So he was a hell of a lot bigger than me, by the way, and this was kind of so fucking stupid, and it was wrong to do, but I was 16, so what do you want me to tell you? So I wrote on his locker, Mick Dumps Keith.
Oh my God!
Which is horrible, and I should have never done that, and I apologize if he hears this, but it was just so stupid, and I don't even remember how all of this happened or what the story was, but he was mad at something, and he trashed my locker, and then that's how I retaliated.
So this must have been around the time when they were having that tiff, right?
That's correct. It was right around that time. So
that's funny.
Isn't that hysterical? I'll tell you another funny story. So at one point in time, Keith Richards had to come to school for a parent-teacher conference, but obviously, wait a second, you're going to love this.
Didn't Patty take care of that?
Well, I guess he showed up. I don't know. So anyway, what they did was they scheduled it like after school so there wouldn't be a crowd. And then kids got wind that he was coming, and they stayed there and waited for him. You know, obviously he's Keith, so he's smoking, right? And he was smoking and throwing cigarette butts on the ground, and kids were wrestling each other for the butts to keep the cigarette butts that he was throwing to the ground. Can you believe that?
That is, wow, talk about a collectible.
I know.
That is crazy.
That's nuts.
That is crazy.
I'm just so fucking the stupid shit that goes on in high school. So anyway, on to letter number 10. And letter number 10 comes from Brandon Wall, Chocolate Slim. And he says, this marks the 40th anniversary of the last album from the mighty Van Halen lineup in 1984. And I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. What are your first memories of hearing 1984? What are your favorite tracks from 1984? What's your least favorite track from 1984? And I'll tell you my little story. It's the first Van Halen album I ever listened to from beginning to end, and I heard it on December 25th of 1995. A family friend had a tape, played it in their car all the way to a family gathering for Christmas, and it blew my mind. It was a life changer, a game changer for me. My favorite tracks are 1984, Panama, Hot for Teacher, Girl Gone Bad, House of Pain. My least favorite are Top Jimmy and Drop Dead Legs. I hope you find this letter entertaining, and sorry if it was too long. Happy trails and stay frosty, Brandon Wall, Chocolate Slim. Okay, and he also says here, Dave and Dave, I was just listening to an old episode of your podcast, 1984, Van Halen is Watching You, from February of 2019. I was listening to the mailbag section by a gentleman by the name of Spawn Southhold. And he's from Australia, who wrote to you guys wanting to know what David Lee Roth said after the guitar solo on Girl Gone Bad. Well, Dave and Bon Southhold, I believe I've solved the case. According to Genius.com, what David Lee Roth is saying is, oh. These streets are in ashes. I don't call them my own. Ah. Listen back to it very carefully. I believe that is what he is saying. I hope this helps solve the mystery for both Dave and Bon Southhold. Thanks again, Brandon Wall, a.k.a. Chocolate Slim. So, yes, the first time I heard the 1984 album, I bought it the day it came out. I bought it on cassette and listened to it over and over on the absolute day it came out, which was the 9th of January of 1984. And my favorite tracks are Drop Dead Legs, Top Jimmy in Panama. My least favorite is the intro 1984. Not that I hate it or anything, I just feel like that's the only song on the album that makes it sound dated. So that's my thing there. I don't remember that letter that Bon Southhold wrote in, but thanks for clearing that up and for the lyrical confusion. What do you say, Dave?
I do remember the letter vaguely. That's always been a question, is what does he say during that breakdown of the song?
Yeah.
So thank you for helping us out with that. As far as my first memories of 1984, I don't really have any strong memories of 1984 because, as I said earlier, I really wasn't a fan of Van Halen until late 1984. So, like, when the album came out in January, if I was listening to them, it was only because they were on Top 40 radio. Right. So it wasn't like I was waiting with bated breath or anything for the album. I got hooked through Diver Down first, and then I went back into their catalog. I probably got 1984 next because it was the big album at the time.
Right.
As far as favorite and least favorite tracks, I mean, one of my favorite tracks is Drop Dead Legs. I love the instrumental outro to that. I know that's one of your least favorite tracks, but what can I tell you? Different strokes for different folks. My least favorite track is 1984 because, I mean, thank goodness they only used about a minute or so of it.
Yeah.
Because I get why they used it, the new era, and Eddie's doing keyboards and stuff like that. But for me, it's like, you know what it is? It's the intro to Jump. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
That's how I view it. But the rest of that album is solid. I mean, some of the songs are played out to me. I mean, Panama is a great song, but I've just heard that way too many times. If I never heard Jump again, I wouldn't cry. You know, I'm kind of biased against songs I've heard a million times. But that's just a great classic album. And I'm looking at my autographed poster of the 1984 album that Margot Nejas so nicely sent me. When we interviewed her. You know, one of the best album covers ever.
Ever.
Van Halen album covers ever, which admittedly isn't saying much because their album covers are touch and go, to put it nicely. But I digress. Anyway, great album, 40 years. I'll tell you a story. At work, Dave, I felt really old the other day because somebody had asked like some kind of like trivia question in the email, right? And so I responded back and I was like, by the way, this week is the 40th anniversary of an album that came out on 1/9/84. What is that album? Nobody guessed.
Wow.
Nobody even got it wrong. Nobody guessed. The answer was right in front of them. And now, admittedly, I am one of the older employees at my company.
Oh, okay.
But still, there's definitely a decent amount of people there who are my age. Now, I know they're not all Van Halen fans or whatever, but I couldn't have made it any easier.
I'll tell you why that is. It's very, very, very interesting because what I have noticed about the younger generation is they know songs. They have no clue who the artist is. I'm talking about older songs. So like,
right. And never mind what album it came on.
Forget that. You're not even close with that.
Right.
So like, if you even said Jump, who wrote it? Or like, who put it out? Half the time they can't even get that. They know the song. They don't know the artist, they don't know the album, they don't know the year it came out. They just know the song, and they'll be like, oh, that was in that video game, or that was from that commercial, or that was from that. They all have these weird associations with the song. And this, what's interesting is kind of shows you what the future's going to be like. That's why all these artists are selling their catalogs, because their songs are being used, and they become iconic and well-known, but people have no understanding of where it is from. Like, you know, like the Kate Bush song that got revived, Don't Give Up or whatever, right? That was huge. Like, do you know how many kids know that was Kate Bush? No one freaking knows who Kate Bush is. They just know that song is from Stranger Things.
But Dave,
yeah,
even people of our generation, most people didn't know that was a Kate Bush song
either.
I
know.
Because it wasn't like this big hit
that
got lost to time.
I know. Another one that went like that was the song Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. Remember, it had that big Instagram video of that guy skateboarding and drinking Gatorade. It was just a strange sort of...
I missed that one.
Dave, it was bizarre. Okay. It was just a man skateboarding, drinking a bottle of Gatorade. I think he was holding on to the back of a truck, and almost like the way Marty McFly did in Back to the Future. And the song Dreams is playing by Fleetwood Mac, and this thing went viral. There's nothing weird about it. He's just sort of swaying back and forth, drinking Gatorade, skateboarding on the road, and the song Dreams is playing, and this thing went crazy. Then all of a sudden, Dreams gets revived. So it's like for younger people, especially with YouTube, they discover these old songs. To them, it's like a new song. There's no like, oh, that album came out, and there's none of that. It's just a song from this, and I know it from Stranger Things, and now it's a new song. I mean, that freaking song charted again. It's unbelievable. So anyway, last letter of the night, Dave's absolute favorite, number 11, comes from Eric Torbeck, the perfect letter writer from New Jersey. And what does he say? He says here, I have a fun what if for you that's unlikely. What if Wolf, Dave, and Al separately accepted Sam's invite to guest jam on the Best of All Worlds tour? What song would you like each of them to perform, and what song do you think each would actually perform if they showed up? Rock on, Eric Torbeck, perfect letter writer from New Jersey. Well, I'll tell you this, Eric. It's a great question. What I think they would perform. If Dave showed up, and this is never going to happen. They're never going to show up. But if they were to show up, I think Dave would do Panama, and I think he would do it with Mike, Sam not on the stage. I think Al...
You don't think he's going to do Jump?
No.
Really?
No, I don't think he would do Jump. We're not using keyboards. And also, Panama is already in the set. Like, Mike knows it. You know, like the band knows it. They're not doing Jump on this tour. So I think Dave would do Panama. I think it's easier, cleaner. He goes out with Mike. He does Panama. Sam's not on the stage. Al, I think, with Sam, would do Pound Cake. I think he'd do Pound Cake. And Wolf, I think, with Mike, Sam off the stage, would do On Fire. He knows On Fire. He's done it live with Dave Grohl and stuff like that.
Right, I'd be cool with that.
What I'd like to hear, I mean, this is never going to happen. This is pie in the sky shit. I'd love to hear Dave sing Sinner Swing with Mike, Sam off the stage. Call. Okay? Al, ready for this? Pleasure Dome with Mike, instrumental jam. No Sam.
Good call. I like that. Yeah. Good call.
All right, and Wolf, Light Up the Sky with Mike, Sam off the stage. I got a better chance of winning the lottery, and I don't even play the lottery, for that to happen.
Those are good calls. I can't beat that. I was really having trouble thinking, like, what are they going to play? I mean, what are they going to play if they actually showed up? They're going to play the popular songs is what they're going to do.
Yeah.
What would I love for them to play? I mean, deep tracks, right?
Yeah.
Deep tracks.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen.
No, I don't think so. Well, that wraps up the mailbag segment. And we are on to our interview with Simon Alkin, who is the man who is putting out the Eddie Van Halen documentary. And this is very exciting. This is a YouTube series that he has been working on. He is from Denmark, originally from Ireland, but he lives in Denmark now. And he's working on this multi-piece documentary. It's not a huge, long movie. He's doing chapters, and each chapter is around 5-6 minutes. But it's really, really well done. He's a really nice guy, and he has been working on this for a long time. Dave and I saw the first 2 episodes, and they're phenomenal. and it's focused on Ed as a man, from when he was born and how he grew up and his whole background as an immigrant and coming to America, and it's going to take you up to Van Halen's first album, and then he's thinking about what he's going to do after that. But right now it's going to be a 4-part series. Dave and I saw the first 2 parts, and they are excellent. You guys are going to love it. And we did a whole in-depth interview with him, and that is all coming up next. Take a listen.
Where does Van Halen come from? Where do I come from? And it's like when I was born, I looked exactly the same, buddy. You know, I had the sunglasses and everything. The only difference was I needed a shave. And when I jumped off the table, tipped the nurse a quarter and said, "Which way is Times Square, baby?" My parents were frantic, but I called them up in a couple months and told them at school I got a job. I'm singing in a band.
Take a trip to the rock concerts of the 80s in this new full-color 300-page book, Pictures Alive, filled with never-before-seen photos. Go back and see the mighty Van Halen at their peak from 2 amazing concerts in 1982 and 1984, plus photos from Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth's solo tours, and many other bands of the day. Filled with amazing photos, classic stories, original ticket stubs, and more. If you're a fan of Van Halen, you will not be disappointed. Hit the ground running with Pictures Alive, the new book, now available at picturesalive.net. That's picturesalive.net. picturesalive.net. Get it today. Hello, loyal listeners. Wanted to let you know about our new Patreon. If you like what we do and you have the means, drop us a donation to keep the podcast going. Go to patreon.com/DD Unchained. That's patreon.com/DDUNCHAINED. Any size contributions are greatly appreciated. We have special packages to those who donate $45 or more. You'll get the Unchained package. Trust me, it's worth it. Contribute $65 or more and you can get the Romeo Delight package, which is Unchained plus more. $95 or more scores you the Top Jimmy package, which is the kitchen sink. If you're a Van Halen hardcore and listen to this cast, this is stuff you'll appreciate. It's ear candy. Those who want one of the packages simply email ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com. That's ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com to make arrangements. What is understood need not be discussed. If you would like to send us a letter asking a question or making a statement or whatever you'd like to say, you can send it to ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com.
So hey everybody, this is your favorite rock journalist, Stephen Charles Rosen, the legendary one, talking to you from my unbelievable conversation with Dave and Dave Unchained. And I need to tell you one more thing. This Dave guy is one tenacious dude, and he came after me month after month to come on his show, and I'm very happy I did. So rock on, everybody. Rock on, Dave and Dave.
Martin Popoff here. Hope you're enjoying this latest episode of Dave and Dave Unchained, the wise swamis on all things VH. Just wanted to remind you that at martinpopoff.com, I've got 2 Van Halen books that I wrote. One is Van Halen, a visual biography, which is basically a big hardcover coffee table book, 400 images, 20,000 word detailed timeline. And the other one is called Unchained, a Van Halen user manual. It's the sort of 120,000 word, very academic, a lot of crazy chapters, a lot of trivia, wordy book that I did on Van Halen. So yes, go to martinpopoff.com. I sign and ship those out of my office here in Toronto. There's PayPal buttons for the US, international, and Canada. Again, Van Halen, a visual biography, and Unchained, a Van Halen user manual. Back to Dave and Dave.
Author Greg Renoff is back with a new book, Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music. The new biography of the record producer Ted Templeman, who went on to produce Van Halen, the Doobie Brothers, Van Morrison, Aerosmith, Sammy Hagar, and more. The book, which runs $19.95, and it's currently available at Amazon.com. From the man who brought you Van Halen Rising comes Ted Templeman, a platinum producer's life and music, written by Templeman as told to Greg Renoff. Available for only $19.95 at Amazon.com. Order it today.
We didn't purposely make the second record different, but we didn't purposely try to copy the first one either.
Whoa, I'm a one-trick pony.
What a trick.
What a trick. It's a very diverse trick, but it's one. So no matter what I try.
Well, and to a certain extent, everything Van Halen does sounds like Van Halen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an incredible guest this evening. He is currently working on an Edward Van Halen documentary, which is going to be aired on parts on YouTube. This is Simon Alkin. Simon, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, and what an intro. My first interview, and now I feel like I've hit the big time.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you, and we're very excited about this project you're working on. Tell us, just to start off, when did you first discover Eddie Van Halen?
I'm born in 82. So, I grew up in the 80s and, you'd hear Jump all the time. Even in Europe, where Van Halen aren't so big, you'd still hear something like Jump. But I guess in terms of actually really becoming a proper Van Halen fan, I took up playing guitar at about 17. And it was kind of only then that I really kind of was turned on to, hang on, have you listened to Van Halen before? And I was like, those guys with Jump, the synthesizer and everything, you almost think of it as like a novelty song in a way, like it's a big hit. You think of it in those sort of 80s terms. But then people are like, no, man, Van Halen 1, you got to listen to that album. It's amazing, And so it was kind of there where I took up playing guitar and I heard about this. And then I was like, okay, shit, this is completely different to anything I was aware of before.
Okay, cool. Also, we should note that Simon is from Denmark, correct?
Well, I'm from Ireland. You might hear it a bit in my accent. I'm from Dublin, Ireland, but I live in Denmark.
Oh, you live in Denmark, but you're from Ireland. Okay, cool. So when you were growing up, this was in Ireland.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
What was the popularity of Van Halen in Ireland when you were growing up?
I mean, they were pretty big. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where it's kind of always like that, where in your group of friends, you're all into the same thing. So you sort of think everybody's like that. But I mean, I feel like they were pretty popular. I mean, it's not like the same as it is in America, because I've seen it a lot in the States before, just how big they are. At times it's almost like Led Zeppelin big, but they were popular, maybe not quite as popular, but I think people were aware of how huge they were across the Atlantic as well.
Okay, now you said you were 17 when you started playing guitar. How old are you now?
I'm 41.
41. Okay, and you still play guitar?
I do a bit, yeah. I've just taken it up again after a long time not playing. I didn't have one when I moved over here about 11 years ago, and I've just bought a Gibson SG a few months back. So
nice.
I'm getting slowly into it again. I'm trying Eruption, for the first time since I got that new one. I got my work cut out still.
I can imagine.
That was going to be the next question, was can you play Eruption yet?
No, I can play a lot of the tapping part. The end part of the tapping part is hard. The sort of the at the end. The earlier parts I can do okay. Some parts not so okay. It's a work in progress. I want to buy one of those EVH striped Frankies, like the relic one, like Ed's one. But I sort of said to myself, I can't buy that until I can actually play Eruption. I have to be able to do that first. That's the challenge.
Of course.
Save your money.
Absolutely.
Yeah, save my money.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me, when did you start getting deep into Van Halen?
I got into them a lot around when I said before, when I was a teenager. And I guess sort of my late teens, early 20s, I was really into them. And that's where I kind of listened to all of the Dave era, really there. But then I guess there was a long time there, though, where I was kind of more of a lapsed Van Halen fan. Like, I always really liked the band, but, I go in cycles with certain bands where I'll listen to them a lot for a while and then I'll go off it for a while. And I went off Van Halen, not because I didn't like them, but just because I was listening to other things in my life or whatever. And then it was after Edward passed in 2020, where I remember when I heard the news, like it was breakfast time here, and I was with my daughter, who was like 3 years old or 4 years old at the time. And like, I remember playing Eruption for her, because going like, oh, this guy just died and it's really sad, and she was going, it's so boring, Dad, listen to Eruption. I'm going, kid, that is the opposite of boring. you know? So it was kind of there that it sort of triggered in me again. Like, I just went back to it. And this time when I went back to it, I went back to it in a different way where I suddenly started devouring it. Because I guess when I was into them before, it was also in a weird period. Like, when I'd been into them first, it was in a weird period for the band where they had no presence at all. It was like after Van Halen 3, and, you know, that had been a failure, you know, of sorts. And then, you know, Edward had a lot of problems, so they were completely out of the spotlight then for the next few years after that.
Right.
And so it was a weird time to get into them. So I was into them, but I guess I didn't know all of the details. But after Edward passed and I got back into them, it was like I just totally dived into it. Because suddenly now there's a lot more to kind of get your teeth into as well. Like, there's more books, there's more knowledge that people have, there's more internet groups and whatever else that you can kind of go to and really read more about it. And it just kind of went from there. And it sort of snowballed from that point.
So when did the concept of putting a documentary about Edward come about?
I guess it was about nearly a year and a half ago. I've made some documentaries before, and I had a relationship with a producer. I won't say who it is, but he's a really big name producer. And like, you'll have definitely seen a couple of music-based documentary films he's produced in the past year on some of the big streaming things. He's really big time. But I have a relationship with him anyway, where I've brought ideas to him before, and we've tried to develop things. And so I came to him about, I just couldn't believe, you know, after, you know, a couple of years had gone by at that point since Edward passed, and there was still no word about any documentary, or this tribute thing had kind of fizzled out. Not that we even were aware of it, I think, at the time. I was just kind of going like, how is there not a film about Edward Van Halen? Because it's so fascinating. And so I took it to this guy, and, you know, he just said, like, why don't you maybe just work on a pitch, work on you know, something that we can sell it with, but I'm broadly speaking on board with the idea. I think it's great. And so I basically spent the next couple of months making a trailer out of materials that were already there, something that was like about 3 or 4 minutes long that could kind of give a flavor of the film, just using interviews and clips and whatever I could get my hands on that's out there. This producer, he was crazy about it, you know, just said, yeah, we'll really go for this. So I did a small written pitch as well. And then we took it to Van Halen's management, though that was about, I don't know, 13 months ago. I think it was December 22, and they basically immediately shut us down on that. So the response was just, we have no interest in doing a documentary because at least one member of the group doesn't want to do one, and we will not be passing on your materials for anyone to see either, to protect all parties. So, I mean, that was disappointing at the time, of course. Not entirely surprising, I guess, given the way things go in Van Halen world. But I guess I'd also say that, of course, it's their prerogative, it's their music and their legacy. And even though some of us are maybe disappointed by some of the decisions, and I know you guys talk about it a lot, the lack of upkeep on the legacy.
Yeah.
I guess we all still have to kind of respect it, you know, in a way that the band has certain things that they want to do and they don't want to do. And, you know, that's their choice. But then it kind of went from like, so I mean, I sort of thought there, okay, the project is pretty much dead for the time being, at least. And I looked at ways maybe over the next few months of maybe trying to, is there another way in to try and get somebody to at least look at it? And I didn't really get anywhere with that. I mean, I thought I could get somewhere with it, but it never really panned out. And then following on from that, I saw our mutual friend Alan Berry's documentary that came out on 1984. You know, that kind of really showed me, like, I'm going to plug Alin here because Alan's a great guy and he's helped me a lot. And, you know, I was just so impressed with what he did. I know you guys were too. And yep. I think most people who've seen them have been. I sort of saw that and went, you know, it's really possible to still do something that's not authorized and still do something that's worthwhile. He sort of opened my eyes to that possibility. And so it kind of went from there that I went, okay, it still might be possible to do something, maybe not on the scale or not on the budget that I had originally hoped for, but maybe still possible. It's come from there. It was a few months ago where I kind of said, yeah, you know what, I'll go for it, you know, and it kind of went from there.
So tell me, what was your reason for doing this? Mainly because it didn't exist? Do you have a background in doing filmmaking?
Yeah. I mean, I've worked in TV, like mostly sports TV, my whole kind of working career. But I've done some documentaries, like both kind of mini documentaries, but also kind of a big series here in Denmark for the sort of like the Danish equivalent of like the BBC. I did one, a couple of years back. So yeah, that is my background. It's kind of producing and editing pieces. When I do it for sports TV, it's sort of producing interview pieces and mini documentaries that'll go into the show, the kind of the pre-game show, that kind of thing. But yeah, I got experience then of being the sort of director, I guess, of a big documentary series over here a couple of years back. So yeah, I mean, that just sort of gave me the appetite for more. Like I said, I just felt like it's something that's really lacking out there,
Yeah.
for the fans. What Alin did was fantastic, of course, but it's something for, the hardcore fans. Whereas I guess I was kind of thinking like, well, I am a hardcore fan, but there's nothing out there that really kind of documents this guy's life and career, and he's a legend. I mean, we all saw all of the tributes that there were after he passed, and what an enormous deal this was, and yet there's no documentary, I mean, I guess there have been documentaries. You've talked about some of them, but there may be some of the unofficial ones haven't really hit the mark, but there hasn't been anything kind of comprehensive that really tackles the subject in a serious way, or, trying to tell the story in the right way before. And I just thought it's crazy that this hasn't happened yet. So, why not me?
Let me tell you something. I think you did a fantastic job. Dave and I have only seen the first 2 episodes. And just to let our listeners know that Simon really has a cool style. The way Alin has his own style, Simon's is a bit different, but it's very user-friendly. It's well-produced, well-made. It looks just like something you would see on television. So it's got that level of production, and it really flows well. It takes you from the very, 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 very beginning, from when Eddie is a baby, and takes you through his life. So now we've only seen the first 2 episodes, which is Eddie's real interesting beginnings, which is not really focused on, obviously, Greg Renoff talked about it in his book, Van Halen Rising, but like Simon said, for someone who doesn't even know Eddie Van Halen, maybe just knows the name, you could watch this and get engaged, because it's sort of a perfect way to enter into the whole Van Halen story, because it takes you from who is this guy, where did he come from, and as interesting and colorful as his career in Van Halen is, he has an unbelievable immigrant story even prior to that. So this is what Simon gets into in the first couple episodes. And so tell us, how did you get this information? You have incredible pictures. How did you put this all together? What kind of research did you do for this?
I mean, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, it's just reading every day, I mean, that's the beauty of doing this, is because it really is my interest, my hobby, and the kind of work that I like to do anyway. And it's like all those things just combined. It's a shitload of reading. It's a shitload of getting out there and seeing what's available online. But it's totally a labor of love, So, I mean, I've devoured the books, the sort of the major texts, I guess, that people will know who listen to this show. I mean, there's, Greg Renoff's book that you mentioned, a fantastic book, so detailed, unbelievable research in that. Greg has also done a lot of great work since that book, in terms of like, he had this sort of Facebook page or other things online that he kept going, where he would put things out, like photographs he'd gotten after doing the book and things like that. So it's amazing what a resource that's been. Of course, Steve Rosen's book, Tone Chaser, just totally seminal text, in the whole thing. And Steve's also been really cool to me. I've been in touch with him. He said it's no problem if I use stuff of his that's out there already, which was just really, really big of him. So I'm just, massive respect. And I love that book as well. The Talinsky and Gill book, Eruption. I guess when I was reading that, is probably when I started to think of the documentary, actually, in the first place. I listened to it as an audiobook, and I just went, even though it's not Edward's voice in it, you just kind of listen to it going, I'm listening to it thinking, this is a film. I just want the film and the pictures to be playing in front of my eyes as I'm hearing this in my ears, So like, that book was huge for me too. And Yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff out there now. I want to try and find material that people haven't seen before as well. That's quite difficult because, so much has come out in the last few years. But my first concern is to try and act, I guess, like a bit of a, I don't know, what would you call it, like a funnel or something? I want to try and find absolutely everything I can that's already out there and just have this enormous pile that's come from thousands of sources, different sources, and just say, okay, now I want to just funnel this down into something concentrated and coherent and that can act like a reference point. That's what I hope to do.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Let me tell you something. That's what you're doing. So just to give you guys a little taste, what Simon has done is, imagine if you had all these little scraps of paper with all this cool information on. He has created a timeline and threaded them together, similar to what Alin did with his 1984 documentary, because there's so much information about the 1984 time and this and that, and Alin took all the pieces and kind of sewed them all together to make a story and had his own style in presenting it. Simon has done something similar in that way, in the sense that he has taken all these photos and documents and has a voiceover and it strings it all together, and there's interviews in there. It's really well done. And wanted to ask you, so you have the first 2 episodes. When are you going to be dropping those, and how many episodes do you think you'll create?
First of all, I never said thanks before for all the kind words, so I'm going to say thank you now. That really means a lot that you say all that. Right now, I've got the 2 you've seen finished, and I'm in the middle of the 3rd one. The idea in my head, anyway, and I think this is probably what will happen, is I want to drop the first one on January 26th, which would have been Edward's 69th birthday. The idea is that I would like to sort of have maybe 3 done by then, and then maybe start dropping them once every 10 days or something like that. My initial plan is that I'm going to have 4 episodes. Each of them is about, I guess, around 5-6 minutes. They're shorter than Alan Berry's Van Halen documentary. That was more I guess they were more like half an hour or something.
Right. 20
maybe a bit
minutes,
more.
Half hour, yeah.
That was a bit more long form, but I kind of took the approach of thinking, well, with YouTube stuff, you never know, with attention spans. And
yes.
I'm also pitching this, I guess, a little bit more an audience that isn't just Van Halen hardcore fans. I mean, I hope I appeal to them too, but I'm trying to have it be something that, people who have only barely heard the name would be interested in seeing and hearing more about. So
yeah.
I didn't want to push my luck with anything too long form. So I kind of took the decision to go, okay, YouTube, I usually look at things for 5-10 minutes on YouTube. That's it.
Right.
So it's I keep the parts shorter and kind of, maybe condense it a little bit, but keep the parts short. You still want each one to have a little bit of a beginning, a middle, and an end, but you're sort of keeping it in sort of these kind of bite-sized chunks for people to examine. Also, part of the thinking with doing it in small parts was also that one part ends and then you can have maybe a slightly different style for the next part, so there's some unifying things in the look or the tone of what you're giving it. You can kind of change up the visuals, or the music on another part and give it a different, so it's chapters in a book almost. The feel of it can change slightly each time and keep it a bit fresh,
Yeah.
Now, part of the challenge on YouTube is releasing something that won't get struck down, which is a challenge Alin had, in particular with the music. So I'm sure you've had experience in this. So have you given that any thought into what you have to do proactively to make sure that doesn't happen when you release it?
Yeah, I mean, that's another way that Alin has been a huge help to me. He's taken the hits so the rest of us can kind of, maybe avoid some of the same problems. It was really disappointing what happened with his. I mean, you guys did 2 interviews with him, I think. I heard the one where he talked about the whole process and everything, and it was just, I felt so sorry for the guy because he put in so much work. But yeah, I mean, I have thought about it. My approach, I guess it doesn't matter so much for these first 4, because that's pre-Van Halen being the famous Van Halen, that we all know. These first 4 parts, they might cover up to the first album. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I don't think there would be any Van Halen music required in these 4 either way. So I can kind of get by without that and just sort of have more like score type music that I can use legally and have that carry it. There's a lot of things in this because I'm building it as I go and I'm building it chronologically. So there's a lot of things where I'm thinking to myself, yeah, in about 3 months, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. And how am I going to get around that one? But I think I can do it without using the music. I mean, Alin has also talked to you guys about fair use and things like that. It's kind of a nebulous concept. I mean, I think you could get away with using very limited amounts of Van Halen music, but only in very, very limited amounts, and specifically when you're referring to something, you know?
Yeah.
I think with that, I can probably get by with what I need, but it is going to become more of an issue as I progress. Right now, it's been fine to do the early years without it. Another issue I've got as well beyond the music is, of course, there's a lot of photographs, or there might be video clips, or there might be whatever, and it's also trying to get permission. I mean, in some cases, I can probably go without permission because it is very, very limited clips, and that could fall under fair use, and you're referring specifically to something and then you play a short clip of it. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
But people's photographs in there that they've taken, and you don't want to just take their work, you know, and not be fair to them. So I'm kind of in that process right now as well, of just sort of reaching out to people, seeing if I can get permission from them, and also seeing if there's anything out there that maybe we haven't seen before as well.
There's also one interview that you used with Ed that I'm so curious about. It's Ed, I'm going to say somewhere around the late 90s. It's a black and white interview. It's very close up on his face. Where did that interview come from?
Are you talking about the one that finishes the first part?
Yes.
It's the one where he talks about his father, just to, you know, keep pedaling, you know.
It's a beautiful shot. Whoever shot it did an incredible, beautiful, like this artistic, almost sepia tone of Ed's face, and he's talking about his dad. I've never seen that before, which was amazing. A really good find. Where did that one come from?
That came from, I don't want to get myself into too much trouble, although I have credited them, I think. It's from Esquire, I think. I think Esquire were doing like
okay.
I don't know, it was like some anniversary or something for them. Maybe, I don't know, it was like 50 years or whatever it was. I think it was 2012.
Okay.
Because I think it's around the sort of era of Different Kind of Truth. It was like getting a message from various different famous people, I think, about the best advice you've ever gotten or something like that.
Oh, okay. That was cool. That was a really cool clip. I really enjoyed that. And like I said, that Simon took all these pieces and put together this Van Halen story, and it's such a unique story. Many of our listeners are probably not even aware of a lot of the stuff that's in this documentary because there's so many elements and details about the early years of Alex and Eddie coming here, and you have to realize a lot of the way they ran Van Halen was based on the fact that they were these sort of outsiders who were immigrants who came to California, and they really stuck together and only played together, and they were very guarded people about their music and their band and everything. So it's sort of their whole background history gives you a little insight into kind of the way they decide to do things. They're very sort of, you know, trepidatious about certain things because of the way they grew up and their background. So it was very interesting, and there's a lot of detail into how Edward operates. How I think in one of your documentaries you talk about Eddie's like drinking and smoking at a very, very young age, which obviously impacts his whole time as an adult and as a musician. So there was so much in there that was really interesting. So you're going to drop the first episode on the 26th, and then when will you drop the second and the third? Like, what's the time spacing?
I don't know if I have exact dates, but I mean, I think the first one on the 26th, then I'll go about 10 days maybe in between. I had thought originally a week in between.
Okay.
But I think I might push it out to 10 days just because I'm going on vacation in early February. So it's a week that I can't do anything. I mean, basically what I want to do is sort of have the first three done by the time I put the first one out.
Okay.
And then work on the fourth one in those sort of weeks then while the first three are coming out, and then have that ready about 10 days after the third one. So, I mean, it'll be January 26th, and then I guess the other three will be during February, or maybe the last one will be the start of March. I'm not sure.
Okay. And is there a name for the project?
The working title at the moment, I think I will stick with, is Edward Van Halen, a musician.
Okay.
Because, I kind of grappled with it because it's like, you have all these, so many of things to do with Van Halen or books or documentaries. And this isn't like to criticize anybody because they're very cool names to use. But like so many of them have already used like Unchained or Eruption. These kind of obvious cool word titles they're kind of made for something about Edward or the band, And so I just thought to myself, I should go for something a bit different, or something that's not that anyway, so that it's not just following the same as what other people have done. And I just thought, if you go listen to the interviews or read the interviews or watch the interviews of Edward, what he always comes back to is that's what he describes himself as. More than anything, he's always at pains to say, that's what I am. I'm a musician. You know, I'm not a rock star. I'm a musician. We're musicians. This is what we do, And so I kind of thought this is like the essence of the man is a musician. He says himself numerous times, he wasn't good at anything else. He couldn't do anything else. Sure, he's selling himself short when he says that, because he was a smarter, more articulate, more perceptive guy than sometimes he ever gave himself credit for.
Sure.
But he was a musician. That's what he was born to do. Music and family are the two kind of strands that kind of cut through his whole life,
Right, absolutely. And if you get success with this and people like it and you get a lot of hits, will you continue beyond the 4 episodes?
I think that no matter what, I will try to do another 4 or 5 during this year. That would cover, I guess, the original sort of classic Van Halen era, 78 then to 84. Unless it comes out and people hate it.
No one's going to hate it. It's impossible to hate.
Unless people... No, thanks. But I mean, unless people really were critical of it or really didn't like it, I think I will try, regardless, to try and do those next 4 or 5. I mean, it's nothing against the Sammy era or anything, but that's where my main interest in Van Halen lies.
Okay.
I guess the same as yourselves.
Right.
A bit more weighted towards that part of the story. I want to do that no matter what. In an ideal world, I would like to do the whole story. I would like to do something that kind of takes in his whole life. But I guess I'll see how these 4 do, and then I'll make the next 4 or 5, and then I'll kind of see how they do. And then maybe I'll sort of take stock there and think, okay, will I go on with the rest, or is it time to move on to something else? Because, it takes time, especially when you got a day job and 2 kids and all that stuff. It's not a small kind of time commitment, but I want to do it. I really, really would like to do it. I'd like to have a lot of parts that take in the whole journey,
First of all, we really appreciate the commitment you're putting into it, because as you pointed out, it wasn't your day job. From what we've seen so far, I think it grabs people, not just the core fans. It will grab the core fans because, as Dave pointed out, there were some things in there that we were like, oh, we didn't know that. That's interesting. Because when Dave and I watch these things, to be honest, we're kind of snobs about it, because we're kind of like, oh, well, we do a Van Halen podcast. Is there anything we don't know, right? We know there's stuff we don't know because we're always forgetting stuff. But we were like, oh, look at that. There's something to keep the diehard fans interested. But it's also enough for people who aren't diehard fans to grab them in too. So if you're worried about the first 4 episodes, like crapping out and not doing well, I find that highly unlikely myself, quite frankly. And I think you've nailed the title perfectly, because that's the title that will probably give you the least amount of trouble from the family, because like you said, that's what Ed thought of himself. So keep on going and keep on doing it, because we've had a preview of the first 2 episodes and we're already hungry for more.
Oh, yeah. Now, Simon, a quick question for you is, if you continue beyond the 4, will you still have the focus mainly on Ed? Because once you get into the band, obviously you're dealing with the whole band, but will you focus mainly on Ed and his journey through that time?
Yeah, I think that's something that I really, really want to keep as a through line in it, because I actually just kind of thinking about this yesterday, because I was I'm sort of hammering out the kind of rough timeline of the 3rd part. And the 3rd part is kind of a bit like the Van Halen Rising part in a way, where it's like the bands that they joined, it's Trojan Rubber Company, then it's Genesis, and then it's Mammoth, and then it's, Van Halen. And it's like all the backyard parties and all that. That's a difficult one to do, and to just keep it focused on Edward. because it's so much, okay, this is the band coming together. It's the four with Mark Stone, then he leaves and Michael Anthony joins, and it's the four classic Van Halen members coming together. So that one, probably of all of them, it's not completely focused on Edward. The focus is spread a bit more evenly, and trying to tell the story a little bit. I think that people will know a lot of the story, so I want to keep some form of uniqueness to it and keep it focused on Ed wherever I can. And where I use interview clips, I want to keep it to him as much as possible all the way through, and his kind of perspective on things and the way he thought and stuff like that. Because, okay, I mean, that might give a slightly one-sided take on things, because we all know what it was like between him and Dave, and there's got to be two sides to every story. And Edward Van Halen was by no means perfect at all, and I don't want to paint him as that either. But I do always want to keep it wherever I can in his voice, as it were.
Yeah, well, I think that's important because I think that makes it unique. And I don't really think it's so much one-sided. I think you're presenting his life. That's the title. That's the whole thing, is that you're basically giving his outlook and what he went through and his journey through the whole process. So I think that's important. And I think it's also what is going to draw the most attention, because Ed is certainly the most legendary part of the band, right? I mean, he is a obviously groundbreaking musician. Not that the other guys are not good, but Ed is going to be up there in the top echelon of the greatest guitarist of all time, forever and ever. That's just the way it is. So he's cemented in there like Hendrix and Clapton and Beck and stuff like that. But it's interesting that you mentioned that it's amazing how much there isn't out there on him, because, you know, and I wanted to ask you that, do you think that in your research and in your time working on this, that he gets a little caught under the wash of some of the 60s guitarists? You know, my partner Dave here always says, you know, a lot of these English guitarists from the 60s, they get this reverence around them that he doesn't get, like Clapton, like Page, like Beck, and all those guys. You know, because Edward was an artist that was changing from one era to another, from 70s to 80s, and his success overlapped, right? He was sort of the bridge from the 70s to the 80s, that sometimes he gets overlooked. And then a lot of the copycats, right? So the whole 80s hairband era really came from Edward. Now, was Edward a hairband? No, he wasn't at all. He was a 70s rock band, but it's like they attach him sometimes to the hairband movement because all the hairband guys were copycats of Ed, so therefore he sort of gets lost in the wash sometimes as, oh, he's a lickety-split 80s guitar guy. But, you know, there's so much more to him than just that. Yeah, of course, he's a lickety-split 80s guitar guy. However, you know, he also is a songwriter. He's an incredible musician. He's done so much. And I think even some of his playing and recording and writing during the Sammy years even support that. Because, you know, something like Right Now and all these other songs that he wrote, you know, there's some incredible music underneath all the flash that he wrote, and I think he gained a lot more respect with that. Now, it's so funny because he's mixed in there because, yeah, he's this flashy guitarist, but then he's written all these pop songs, but then he's also this incredible musician. He's sort of a real mixed bag. I mean, this guy has so much going on. He could play gorgeous classical music, and he could also write a real hit pop song that goes to the top of the charts. There's not many people like that. Most people are in one camp or another. He has a lot of different hats that he wears. And, you know, like you said in your documentary, his story is unique. I mean, his background story is so unique, the way him and Alex came here kind of under the tutelage of his dad and his very strict mom, and it was just a very interesting background. And I really think that our listeners, and everybody else for that matter, is really going to gain a lot of knowledge from your episodes because it really gives you an understanding of where these guys are coming from. And even with some of the decision making that sometimes we don't always agree with, you see where the roots are, because they're very guarded, they're very family oriented, and they stick within the family, and they don't really like outsiders sometimes. They record in their own place, and it's interesting to really get the background on there. So I think that is an important thing to do, and I'm going to encourage you to move forward through that for sure. As far as you're concerned about time, remember this, there's no timeline that you have to stick to. If you decide to get these first 4 out and then you don't get another 4 out for 4 months, what's the difference? You're not working for a film company who's pressuring you for a deadline. Everybody knows these things take time. I know just from doing this podcast that we do, it takes a lot of time to do, and we put it out on a monthly basis. But you know what? I think if you want to take your time and do it right the way you want to do it, take your time. And at whatever time it needs to do it right, you do it right. There's no pressure for you to keep cranking out these episodes. So what you want to do is focus on the first 4 right now. You're in the middle of 3, and I know you want to complete the 4. So, you're going on your vacation. If you go on your vacation, you come back, you just pause it. No one's sitting there with some sort of spotlight on you like, hey, where's the episodes? It'll come out when it comes out. And the other thing is, the most important thing that Dave and I always talk about is the legacy that this band has is immense. Whether they tap into it or not is their own choice. That's their own choice. However, I think it's important when fans like yourself take their talents, time, and effort to put forth material like this. And this is what I said to Alin, and I'll say it to you, is we're so appreciative of stuff like that because that's exactly what people need. And this is even more open than Alan's, and nothing against Alan's. It's just that obviously Van Halen diehards are going to eat that up, Alan's, right? But yours, you could show an 8-year-old kid who's starting to play guitar, and you know what? Watch this 5-minute video on Eddie Van Halen, and then there's another episode, another 5 minutes. Gives you a little background. You don't even have to know who he is. You could just watch that, and it takes you from ground zero, so it's very user-friendly, and it's also enriching to the diehards. So it's kind of open to everybody. That's why it's different, and it's great. Now, I love Alan's. I have no criticism at all, and I actually told Alin, too, don't worry about the music. Don't worry about the music. I mean, listen, he's the filmmaker, and I understand where he's coming from. He wants it the way he wants it, and I agree. I understand that. However, it doesn't take away from what he did. All his work is there. All the storyline is there. All the photos and the clips, all those different things that he did. It's entertaining. We already know the music. So I said, even if you get background music that is from a guitarist that is of a similar style and just kind of fill in, it's just connecting material. It just makes things flow a bit. You don't have to have. Well, I mean, you got to hit the right tone. I do understand you got to get the right feel and the right. I think that the compelling thing is the man himself. That's the point. He's incredible. To me, he's the greatest rock and roll guitarist ever. Of course, in my personal opinion. But it's like almost beyond that. He's different to the others. I mean, I think is it Vernon Reid maybe? I think said it after he passed. It was like, I never saw any musician up on stage who loved what he was doing as much as Eddie Van Halen, and neither did you. I think that was the quote. It was something like that. Yeah. It is Vernon Reid from Living Colour? I think it was. Yes. But it was like, I just thought that was such an awesome quote. I think Pete Townsend said something similar when he passed. His ability is incredible. We all know that. But it went beyond that. There was a certain aura and an energy and a kind of presence and a guy who just looked like he loved what he did every time he played on a stage, and that's just totally magnetic. And like I said before, I think he's a much more articulate guy than he himself, and I think some other people ever gave him credit for. Regardless of whether you have Van Halen's music or not in it, I think that if you present it in the right way and you feature as much of him telling his own story as much as you can, or as much as you can get away with without infringing on things, he's just such a compelling guy, I think. The man behind it, I think, is what makes it. It's the guitarist that gets you into the subject, I guess, in the first place, but it's the man who kind of keeps you interested
in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's kind of my feeling on it.
I think a lot of these other guitarists saw Eddie, and, when you watched Eddie, and you could see it on video clips, he went into a zone when he played. It's almost like he was there for us to watch, but he was somewhere else. Like, he was locked into that guitar. And I think other guitarists would look at him being like, oh my God, I wish I felt like that. They looked at him like, this guy is so locked in. It's like when you see some sports players that are out there on the court, and if you ever watch Michael Jordan, sometimes when he was on a streak, when he was playing the game and he was scoring 55 points, and this guy, you almost look at everybody else on the court like, what the hell is everybody else doing? Like, because this guy is just on a reign like you can't believe. That's why it was magical in a way, the way Eddie played, and Jordan similarly, because they had this incredible hard work ethic, but also this crazy talent. So when those two kind of came together and they were in the zone, it's like they didn't even know the audience was there. They were just doing their thing and everybody else was enjoying it. And I think a lot of musicians would look at Ed like, God damn. Like, like they just almost like they were set back. Like, holy, this guy's insane.
I think it's because he was so dedicated to it that it became, I've used a quote where he says, like, it's part of me, it's like a part of his body,
Yeah.
Playing, because he played from morning to evening. And I mean, just everybody says that. That is by all accounts. Dave, Al, Steve Rosen, whoever, they all say it. He played from getting up in the morning to going to bed at night. He played and played. So it becomes then when you actually go and play in front of people, on the one hand, it's so automatic. He can just do it in his sleep. First of all, that makes him so incredibly good and incredibly, just as you say, locked in. Because it's so automatic for him to be that good, he's then got room to be like this showman as well on the stage. You know, it's like, okay, Dave gets all the credit for being the showman in Van Halen, but Ed is just so visually compelling to look at on a stage, the smile, the jumps and whatever, you can't take your eyes off the guy.
It's true.
Never mind what he's actually playing,
Yeah. He exudes joy. That's the thing. And I always say that Van Halen was a circus. And Dave was the ringmaster and Edward was the lion. You know what I mean? Like, Edward was the lion that was in the tent. Like, the ringmaster gets you in the tent, he gets you hyped up, and then the fucking lion comes out and you're blown away. Right? So that's really the thing. Yeah. And that's really what made Van Halen so interesting because, Ed needed Dave to be the barker. All right, to get everybody's attention, to kind of like corral it, to kind of host the whole thing. Like, imagine it, like Edward was like a delicious cake and Dave was just the frosting. You know what I mean? It was like a tasty frosting, but the cake was just amazingly well made. And don't get me wrong, Al and Mike were part of making that cake too. And I think Dave knew what Ed was. Like, Dave knew how insane Ed was. And I think Dave made himself as big as possible because he had this fucking lion in the band. He was insane. There was no one like Ed. He was absolutely insane. So I wanted to ask you, what discoveries did you make along the way of making these episodes? Was there any revealing things that really blew you away in the process?
I think the really revealing one for me is like going through Tone Chaser, which I've actually just gone through again for the second time. I'm kind of finishing up for the second time there. It just gives such an insight into what he might say in private versus what he might say in public.
Right.
And I really found that, absolutely fascinating. Like, I was just reading it there. It was like an interview he did with him in I think it was September 96. So it was just after the MTV thing with Dave coming back. We all know the shit hit the fan there and the whole thing started crumbling. Yeah. But it's kind of funny, like in the interview he does with Rosen there that day, it's like he actually really still talks up Dave in private almost. It's like, I actually do love the guy deep down, It's like he wanted to be his friend, but they just never could be friends. It's like they had something about them that just repelled each other somehow. But it was like, that's part of the thing that I find fascinating about it, I guess, and that's sort of been revealed to me in reading it, is like just this really curious relationship that they had. They were brothers, but they just couldn't get along, whereas Al and Ed are brothers who did get along 90% of the time.
Right.
Dave and Ed are brothers who just could never get along at all, but there is sort of deep down somewhere there was love, and that knowledge between the two of them that we've gone back a long way here when we've done all this together, part of what I find fascinating about it.
Yeah, I always find that Dave's contribution to the band is really building the stage for Ed. I mean, as much as I love him as a singer and as a frontman, and, he's funny and he's so interesting, I really think his biggest contribution is he built a massive stage for Ed, because I don't think Ed would have had that stage without Dave. Not that his talent is not worthy. It's just the way our world works, the way the music industry works. I don't know if Ed's incredible genius would get the spotlight without Dave grabbing it. Like, Dave literally did everything and anything to grab the spotlight. And I know he has a big ego and this and that. You always have to consider the person. Sometimes when you don't understand somebody, you have to kind of get in their head and understand where they're coming from. Imagine being in the band with Edward Van Halen. Now, you have this guitarist that's a freaking genius. He's an unbelievable player. You're going on the stage with this guy, so you got to deliver too. But if you're the front man and your guitarist is the Michael Jordan of guitar, you have to do anything and everything to kind of match that. And I think Dave exhausted himself trying to meet Edward's talent. Now, obviously, Dave doesn't have Ed's talent, but what he did was he kind of did his own thing by being colorful, being funny, being aerobic. He would jump off a drum riser. He would wear the craziest thing on stage. He would make jokes. He would flirt with girls. He would do crazy yelps. He would do all these things to try to match the bigness of Ed. And, obviously Al and Mike were support systems for Ed's guitar. That is the bedrock of which Ed plays on. Those two perfectly surrounded Ed and supported him. But you needed Dave out there doing that. So that's sort of like the dynamic there. I think Dave was fueled by insecurity, to be honest with you, because I think that's what fueled him to be Dave.
Oh, yeah. Just to go speak to what you're saying there, I have this really great quote that I think is going to go in this next part. Not to give any spoilers here. It's like Dave saying, I saw Ed play before I was in Van Halen. And I said, what he does with his hands, I want to do with my feet. I want to do with my voice. And he was almost a mentor of mine. I just think that's amazing. That's basically completely confirming what you say, where he was a perceptive guy and he could see, fuck, this is something special here. We got to harness this and we got to put this, like you say, on the biggest platform, the biggest stage possible, and really make it as exaggerated as we can, everything. It's just a fascinating dynamic all the way, because I think that the Van Halens, Ed and Al on one side and then Dave on the other. I'm sorry, I'm leaving Mike out for now. That's not to be unfair.
No, he's part of it. He's all part of it.
It's you have the Van Halens on one side and you have Dave on the other. And it's I don't think either of the two groups would have made it without the other.
Agreed.
You could say Ed was such a shit-hot guitarist. He could have found another singer and maybe they would have made it. But you kind of have this feeling there is a universe where Edward Van Halen was just ended up staying in playing clubs or bars in wherever, or backyard parties.
It's true.
Never made it to that extent. And Dave would never have made it without the Van Halens.
No.
In either. So it was you had these two things that they could never get along properly, but they lifted each other to heights that they otherwise could never have reached.
I also think they pushed each other in the sense that I know Ed and Al used to kind of resent this, but I think it ended up being good for them. Dave used to push Ed and Al to do music that they didn't want to do. Casey and the Sunshine Band songs or other songs that were not in their realm. They loved Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and all that stuff. But the thing is that Dave pushed them to go in a little bit of a dance direction, a little more pop. So I think that element really created this uniqueness of Van Halen, because Van Halen could be just another generic rock band. There was so much more color in the Dave era of Van Halen because Dave pushed it. He would push Ed, and obviously, you know, sometimes Ed wasn't always crazy about being pushed, but at the same time, like even Diver Down's a perfect example, okay? I know people shit on Diver Down, this, that. Dave pushed Ed at the time to do certain things. Fair Warning's my favorite Van Halen record. I love Fair Warning, and I think the work that Ed did there is astonishing. But Dave saw what was going on big picture. He saw the way the music industry was going, and he said, we need a hit now. And he knew that by doing Pretty Woman, look what Ed did with Pretty Woman. He did this incredible version of Pretty Woman, and I know it's not his song, but he did to Pretty Woman what he did to You Really Got Me. Like, he Van Halenized it, and it made it sound like him. And what happened? It brought them right back into the spotlight. They sold millions of albums with Diver Down. They got them the US Festival, and it built them the launching pad to get to 1984. And that is really where they soared even to greater heights. So it's so funny because they were definitely adversaries, but also brothers. So there was a push and pull, but the push and pull is what made the sparks that created the incredible fireworks for the band. So as much as it was probably painstaking at the time and probably annoying and there was so much fighting and difficulty, the result is insane. I mean, they were a mess in 1984 and they came out with one of their greatest albums. It's sort of incredible in that way. So that's what's really wild. And I wanted to also ask you to wrap up, what do you hope to convey to the viewer with your episodes? What do you want them to walk away with after seeing them?
I guess I just want them to see beyond the music. I want this to be something where it's more of a portrait of the guy and who he was as a person. I mean, it's a simple, cliched thing to say, I guess. That's really it, because we know the music. The music is out there. That'll live forever. But I just want to do something that tells people about who this man was. He was a fascinating human being. He was a flawed human being. He fell out with most of the people who ever really cared about him at one stage or another. So he was complex. He was not an angel. You know, he got pissed off about things. He got resentful about things. He was neurotic sometimes. You know, he had huge troubles with substance abuse. But then, beside that, and that's why people love him and why it was talked about so much in so glowing terms when he passed away and when he was alive as well, he had this heart. He had a certain kind of heart about him. He might have done things that were wrong, that were bad. He might have hurt people. But I think his heart was usually in the right place. There was a certain warmth and a certain kind of charm about him. I guess I just want all these things to come out. These are the elements that I want to come through. The things that I see in the interview clips, I kind of want everybody to see. I want to put them together. I want to make something coherent and have people be able to look at it and say, okay, I understand the man now. You know, I understand who he was as a guy. That's it.
Listen, thank you so much, Simon. I really appreciate speaking with you today, and we wish you the best of luck.
It's me saying thanks to you guys, and I absolutely love what you do. I haven't said that yet. I'm such a huge fan, and there's no such thing as an episode that's too long. Let me tell you that. I love it. 3.5 hours, whatever it is, I love it, you know?
Awesome. Oh, well, thank you. There's a lot of fans who agree with you. I wish you hadn't said that, because that will give Dave carte blanche to, like, go for 5 hours. but thank you for the compliment. We do appreciate it.
I love the Dave soapboxes, too. They're great. They're part of it, you know?
The Dave
I wish you hadn't said that either, but...
I'm just disappointed I didn't get the...
Right. It's an integral part of the podcast.
Anything to ruffle Dave's feathers and get his blood pumping. If anything, it's more I'm writing stand-up material for my partner Dave here to attack me with. So, but listen, seriously, Simon, we are so excited about these episodes. We feel so honored that you have done this. We realize the amount of time and effort that you're putting into this. And when I tell you, folks, These are well made. When I say well made, it looks like it came right off of a television production studio. It's got that kind of quality. It's got all kinds of cool images. They're well edited and layered. It's got a great voiceover. It really is well done, and it takes you from Edward Van Halen, the man, the musician. So it's called Edward Van Halen, a Musician. We want you to check it out. Where can they find it? What's your YouTube channel?
I'm sort of working on that at the moment, but I think the channel is going to be called Icons Remembered. I'm sort of wondering if maybe if this works, it might lead to more subjects in the future, and I'm going to go with that. So Icons Remembered is the name of the YouTube channel.
Okay, great. And the name of the documentary is called Edward Van Halen, a Musician.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, we look forward to it. Simon, thank you so much for your time, man. We really appreciate it, and we're so excited about these.
Seriously, it's me doing the thanking. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
You got it, man.
Dave.
Whoa! How about that for rock video music fans? Live all day, all night. You know what you need. Only right here on Dave TV.
Check us out on Facebook at Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast, on Twitter at DD Unchained, on Instagram at DD Unchained Podcast, and you can email us at ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com.
Hey, Eddie Van Halen, get your butt up here, man. Where is he? cheese.